Kuro apologizes to Akira-sama under a lightning-filled sky near the castle. She tearfully admits her failure while looking away in shame. The group looks on as the next phase of the plan begins. The knight announces the readiness of the battle dragon corps. The blue goblin prepares to lead the charge with a word of thanks. The entire company flies out over the landscape on dragonback. The sorrowful demon girl repeats her apology in the midst of a storm. A companion reassures her and prepares to take over the mission. Rows of dragons stand ready as the final preparations are made. The warriors gaze ahead with determination as they depart together. The setting transitions to a modern city filled with massive office buildings. The entrance to a systems development company comes into view. Rows of employees sit at their desks in a quiet workplace. An exhausted worker sighs heavily while typing at his computer station. A junior staff member apologizes for causing his senior to work overtime. The senior man turns in his chair to address the distressed newcomer. He calmly explains the importance of support and training. The mentor shares advice on learning from mistakes in the professional world. The junior coworker expresses his deep gratitude for the guidance. Both colleagues focus back on their screens to complete their work. Takahashi notices a vibrating sound while working at his desk. He remains still as the persistent buzzing continues to catch his attention. The phone on the desk vibrates intensely next to a stack of papers. His coworker points out that the phone has been ringing for a long time. Takahashi explains that today is a very special double anniversary with his girlfriend. He looks up nervously toward his senior colleague who is observing him. The senior man bluntly instructs him to leave the office and go home. Stunned by the suggestion, Takahashi argues that he still has tasks to complete. His mentor insists on finishing the work himself and tells him to reflect on his errors. The senior worker tells him not to leave his girlfriend alone on her birthday. Overwhelmed by the gesture, the young man struggles to hold back his tears. He bows his head in deep appreciation before thanking his senior loudly. The junior staffer rushes out of the workplace while his mentor remains focused. Left alone, the senior man settles in to complete the remaining workload. A quiet transition occurs as the late hours of the night pass by. Stretching his fingers, the exhausted worker finally concludes the day's tasks. He exits the building into the night, heading toward a waiting taxi. A sudden shout from behind causes him to stop and look back curiously. Takahashi reappears with his girlfriend, looking breathless as they approach him. The young man bows again and offers a sincere apology for his actions earlier in the day. Takahashi's girlfriend apologizes for his strange behavior and explains that he felt guilty about leaving work. She presents a takeout bag from a local restaurant as a sincere token of their gratitude. The couple offers the meal to the senior colleague who accepts it with a slightly startled look. Peering inside the package, he discovers the thoughtful variety of food they prepared for him. The healthy dinner set consists of salad, miso soup, an egg, and a side of mashed vegetables. The tired man thanks the pair and plans to enjoy the meal after he returns home. He graciously declines their dinner invitation to ensure they can celebrate their anniversary alone. Takahashi insists on walking his mentor toward the station to show further appreciation for his help. Their footsteps echo along the pavement as the trio begins walking through the city at night. The group shares a light-hearted conversation about how much the younger man relies on his senior. Smiling brightly, the girl mentions that her partner often speaks very highly of his respected colleague. Yagami looks at his junior coworker and quietly acknowledges the young man's genuinely kind heart. He decides to take a different route home to avoid intruding on their date any further. Pausing for a moment at the intersection, he deepens his focus while observing his surroundings. He suddenly screams a warning upon seeing a child running into the path of a speeding truck. Throwing caution to the wind, he lunges forward to push the boy away from the imminent danger. A massive impact sound rings out as the vehicle collides with him at full speed. The entire world fades into a thick and heavy darkness as the scene goes completely silent. The couple stands in a state of absolute horror as they look down with tears in their eyes. Takahashi wails in despair while desperately begging his unconscious mentor to wake up. Takahashi and his girlfriend kneel by the bleeding Yagami as they wait for an ambulance. Blood drips from the dying man's face as he realizes he succeeded in protecting the child. Crying with relief, the girl confirms that the boy only suffered minor scratches during the accident. Takahashi's muffled voice fades out while Yagami loses his sense of hearing in his final moments. His shattered glasses lie on the asphalt nearby as he contemplates the reality of his death. Seeing the couple's intense grief over his condition causes him a deep sense of emotional pain. The spilled dinner set remains on the ground while he regrets not reaching a full lifespan. He clenches his fist in frustration, wishing he could have lived until he was 80 years old. Looking up at the city skyscrapers, he mourns the loss of his hard-earned professional skills. He stares at Takahashi one last time, wishing he could pass his knowledge to his junior. A strange, robotic voice begins speaking inside his head while a fluid shape consumes his vision. A hand reaches out through a swirling vortex of energy as a blinding white light erupts. His body floats inside a translucent bubble while drifting through a chaotic, watery dimension of light. Waves of energy ripple across the void as he is transported far away from his reality. A thick horizontal gradient of black and gray represents his transition into an unknown state. Birds chirp near a large, lone tree standing in the middle of a peaceful rural landscape. The man opens his eyes to see tree branches and a cloudy sky above him. He looks down at his legs while realizing he is sitting in tall, lush green grass. Trembling with shock, he raises his hand and notices that his skin has turned bright blue. He suddenly feels something twitch on his head as his pointed ears move in response to the wind. A group of spear-wielding goblins gathers around with shocked expressions on their faces. The lead goblin demands to know who he is while he stares at his own clawed hands. One of the creatures points upward and explains that he fell directly from the sky. Sitting in the grass, he looks down at his small blue body in complete disbelief. He touches his long pointed ears as he struggles to accept his new physical form. The memory of the fatal truck accident flashes through his mind as he processes his transformation. Reality sets in as he contemplates the impossible circumstances of his sudden death and rebirth. A blinding light fills his vision as he realizes he has been reincarnated into a different world. He falls onto his back and laughs hysterically at the sheer absurdity of becoming a goblin. The scene shifts to a peaceful village composed of several small dome-shaped stone houses. Now wearing a hat and glasses, he carries a woven basket through the tall meadow grass. He exchanges morning greetings with the other villagers while they begin their daily chores. A full month passes as he adapts to his new life and works hard in the fields. He observes the community around him and accepts his place within this strange new society. During his time in the village, he begins to uncover the unique biological traits of his kind. He notices the incredible fertility of the females as they are constantly surrounded by numerous children. Watching a group of goblins celebrate an unborn child makes him feel slightly out of place. He looks upon a field of small graves and learns that his species has an incredibly short lifespan. Comparing them to rabbits and cicadas, he reflects on the fast-paced nature of their existence. He discovers that every goblin is born into this world with their own unique set of skills. Goblins gather around a dying elder to witness the transfer of a glowing skill orb. Although many skills are collected over time, only the original birth skill remains transferable. The protagonist identifies his own unique inherited ability as a full 80-year human lifespan. Standing alone in the woods, he reflects on the wish he made before his reincarnation. He watches as multiple generations of his short-lived companions pass away in mere weeks. After attending many such departures, he finds himself possessing over 200 distinct skills. He strolls through the woods while considering the heavy weight of his inherited knowledge. Sunlight filters through the dense canopy of the massive forest surrounding their hidden village. He huffs and puffs while jogging through the rough terrain of the dense woodland. Looking up at the towering trees, he marvels at the sheer scale of the wilderness. The village remains tucked away in total seclusion far from any nearby human civilization. He discovers a large piece of wild fruit dangling low from a nearby branch. Taking a giant bite, he savors the crunch of the fresh forest snack. He finds comfort in the fact that food still tastes as good as it did before. Unlike his rowdy peers who party all night, he observes their lack of sleep. Tossing the half-eaten core aside, he continues his walk through the rustling meadow grass. A look of deep concentration crosses his face as he ponders a frustrating new problem. He suddenly flushes with heat as his intense biological instincts begin to take over. Even ordinary objects like a tree knot start to look strange to his overactive mind. He gazes at the adorable village children while struggling to reconcile his human memories with his goblin urges. He reflects on how popular he has become with the local goblin girls compared to his human life. While wandering through the forest, he suddenly pauses at a rustling sound coming from the undergrowth. Pushing through the foliage, he finds a tall, elegantly dressed man leaning against a massive tree trunk. Noticing the stranger is coughing up blood, he moves closer to assess the severity of the wounds. The mysterious individual winces in pain, revealing a distinct third eye marking upon his forehead. He slowly opens his eyes to look at the small goblin standing before him in the clearing. Setting his fear aside, the protagonist insists on providing medical aid despite the stranger's surprise. He calls upon one of his hundreds of inherited skills specifically chosen to heal the injured man. Bright orbs of light begin to dance around his fingers as he starts the recovery process. The stranger asks why he shows no fear while revealing his true identity as the Demon Lord. Hearing this title causes the protagonist to freeze in absolute shock for a brief moment. He takes a good look at the man's ornate clothing and realizes the description perfectly matches. A dark silhouette of a legendary conqueror flashes through his mind as he considers the situation. Deciding that logic is useless in this fantasy world, he resumes the healing with renewed focus. The Demon Lord narrows his eyes and remarks that this goblin is clearly far from ordinary. Ignoring the observation, he tells the powerful figure to stop talking and let the magic work. The man claims that his unique nature makes it impossible for anyone but himself to heal him. Despite the protagonist using his maximum effort, the glowing aura seems unable to close the gashes. He stops to ponder the meaning behind the man calling himself a different type of creature. Gathering even more mana, he prepares to push the limits of his inherited abilities to succeed. Tightening his fists, the protagonist considers the weight of the situation, desperately asking if there is anything his vast array of skills can do, revealing that he possesses 277 unique abilities since birth, which causes the injured stranger to look at him with utter disbelief, before the man suddenly bursts into a fit of maniacal laughter, concluding that such a strange mutation is the only logical explanation, while the confused goblin watches him cough and struggle for breath, prompting the Demon Lord to explain that a vast skill set requires an enormous vessel, wondering aloud if the little creature can actually inherit skills from other species, as he directly offers to pass down one of his own legendary abilities, causing the protagonist's eyes to widen in complete and total shock. Observing the regal man's determined expression despite the blood on his lip, he reflects on the many comrades he has already seen pass away, realizing he cannot approach this monumental transfer with any hesitation or doubt. Understanding that the core essence of a goblin and a king are identical, as the Demon Lord demands a chance to leave proof of his existence. Accepting the heavy responsibility with a solemn nod of his head, the protagonist firmly declares his intention to receive the dying man's power. As the stranger prepares himself for the final act of his life, a brilliant sphere of concentrated mana manifests between the two figures. The Demon Lord roars in pain as he releases a blinding torrent of magical energy. A notification appears revealing the transfer of a legendary skill called Law of the Jungle. The protagonist watches the swirling mana while contemplating the true weight of this power. The dying king explains that while monsters naturally obey the strong, this specific ability makes that chain of command absolute and completely unbreakable. His gauntlet hand reaches out to finalize the spiritual link between their two souls. He clarifies that any defeated enemy will offer total loyalty without chance of betrayal. The ruler bestows his title upon the nameless goblin with his very last breaths, leaving the future of the entire world to the small creature's hands. His physical form begins to dissolve into particles of light amidst the tall grass. A peaceful smile remains on his face as the last traces of life depart. Brilliant beams of light pierce through the dark forest canopy toward the clouds. A decorative frame marks the transition into a new chapter of history on this day. News of the ancient tyrant's death spreads joy through the snowy mountain villages. Seers and church officials confirm the end of the era through their crystal balls. Kingdom flags flutter in the sky as celebration begins across the liberated lands. People in the city taverns raise their mugs to toast a long-awaited peace. Despite the public celebration, the true threat remains hidden within the quiet forest. Adjusting his glasses, the protagonist moves forward while carrying a full basket of fruit. He reflects on his previous life as an ordinary office worker who died young. He recalls his final moments jumping in front of a speeding truck to save a child, accepting his tragic fate before being reborn in a mysterious and distant realm, waking up to discover he has been reincarnated as a small goblin child, exploring the lush wilderness with a new perspective and oversized glasses, carrying a heavy basket of freshly picked fruit back toward his village, stopping abruptly when he hears a strange commotion coming from the settlement, noticing a large group of fellow goblins gathered around the central clearing, approaching the frantic crowd to investigate the source of the sudden uproar, questioning a trembling villager about the reason for everyone's visible distress, learning that a local has committed the unthinkable act of killing a human, freezing in stunned silence at the mention of his former race, watching as the surrounding goblins break out into a panicked frenzy, contemplating the severity of the taboo that governs their fragile society, listening to the desperate pleas of the goblin who claims he had no choice, visualizing the life-threatening encounter where he was forced to defend himself from a swordsman, questioning whether even self-preservation is forbidden under their strict tribal laws, reacting with alarm as a new cry for help echoes through the trees, hearing the terrifying news that a group of humans is currently invading their home, witnessing the overwhelming fear that washes over the defenseless village, standing amidst the rising panic while contemplating the gravity of their desperate situation. Distressed goblins of all ages huddled together while mourning their lack of physical strength, noting that their only evolutionary advantage is a remarkably high birth rate similar to rabbits. Cries of despair fill the air as the villagers struggle to process the impending disaster. Yagami observes the chaos with a focused mind while adjusting his oversized glasses. Interrogating a frantic villager, he demands to know the exact number and location of the invaders. The terrified goblin reports that 50 humans are marching straight toward the village entrance. Stepping forward with newfound resolve, Yagami commands the others to stay calm while he handles it. He leaves the safety of the group and walks into the shadows of the surrounding forest. His companions watch in disbelief, questioning how one small goblin could ever defeat a human army. In the distance, the sun glints off the polished armor of the approaching human battalion. Yagami stands firmly in the path of a female knight leading her cavalry through the clearing. The knight looks down with utter contempt while vowing to end their lives without mercy. She levels her long sword toward the small child and commands her men to strike him down. Closing his eyes, Yagami prepares himself for the violent encounter as he accepts the challenge. A squad of armored soldiers roars in unison while charging forward with their blades raised. He instantly activates a powerful defensive skill that turns his small body as hard as iron. The lead soldier's sword connects with a thunderous clash that illuminates the entire forest floor. Confusion turns to horror as the soldier realizes his steel weapon has completely shattered on impact. Yagami raises his hand toward the sky to summon a devastating rain of sharp stones. Despite the magical assault, the knight commander orders her men to continue the relentless charge. Yagami reflects on the success of his first experience using combat skills in the field, while the defeated soldiers groan in pain amidst the stones scattered across the grass, emboldening the small goblin as he realizes his tactical superiority over the human army. Surveying the clearing where dozens of armored warriors and horses lay scattered and broken, letting out a breath of relief while adjusting his glasses after the intense physical exertion. As the knight commander stares down in frustration at her fallen battalion of incompetent men, Yagami ignores her gaze and calmly asks the leader if she is willing to talk, prompting the knight to scoff in disbelief at the idea of a monster seeking negotiation, staring back with an earnest expression that catches the seasoned warrior off guard, slowly reaching up to unbuckle her heavy iron helmet to reveal her true face, showing her short blonde hair as she begrudgingly agrees to listen to his words. Dismounting her horse to approach the tiny goblin on equal footing within the forest, Yagami admits their past mistakes but refuses to beg for a hollow sense of forgiveness, leaving the knight intrigued by the unusually eloquent and logical nature of his argument, as he firmly maintains that their grievances do not justify an unprovoked village slaughter. Standing tall amidst the carnage to question her plan for the total annihilation of his people, shaking his head at her violent logic while asserting that such outcomes will not happen, despite the human belief that any monster with the power to kill must be subjugated. Yagami shocks the commander by explaining that his village operates under its own judicial autonomy, concluding his speech by boldly declaring himself as the official goblin judge. The knight commander stares in stunned silence at the goblin's unexpected proposal, as Yagami suggests a 7-day jail sentence for those who took a human life, emphasizing his point with an earnest gesture of his small clawed hands, which causes the injured soldiers to howl in outrage at the perceived insult. Looking down at the small judge, the commander dryly asks if that is his only offer, suggesting that life imprisonment would be a far more appropriate punishment for the crime. Yagami simply nods in agreement with her stern counter-proposal, silently acknowledging that a goblin's short lifespan makes a week a full life sentence. While the blonde warrior falls into a contemplative silence regarding the terms, the small goblin judge then proposes a co-monitoring system to verify the punishment. Standing before her as the two leaders evaluate each other in the quiet clearing, the commander remains stoic while she weighs the logic against her duty, meeting her gaze with a calm and unyielding stare of his own. Suddenly the restless soldiers erupt in fury, demanding the total destruction of the village, prompting Yagami to sigh at the persistent rowdiness of the defeated battalion, until he activates an inherited skill that demands absolute obedience from the conquered, casting a powerful aura that shocks the rebellious soldiers into immediate submission, forcing every armored man to drop to his knees and swear eternal loyalty to him, leaving the commander in absolute disbelief as her men pledge to serve their new master. while Yagami rubs his chest in slight embarrassment at the efficacy of his power. The knight commander smirks at the little goblin's audacity, erupting into boisterous laughter as she finds his negotiation tactics genuinely amusing, finally agreeing to acknowledge his laws within the forest while maintaining her own authority outside, before curiously inquiring if the small creature possesses a name of his own, causing the former office worker to hesitate while worrying about the strangeness of his original identity, until he eventually reveals that he is called Akira, a name she finds quite peculiar, prompting the blonde warrior to introduce herself as Karen, a high-ranking security inspector, which leaves the small goblin staring in contemplative silence at his new acquaintance, as Karen suddenly barks orders for her battalion to assist their wounded and prepare for withdrawal, leading her armored soldiers and horses away from the forest edge as the tension finally dissipates, returning focus to the humble goblin village nestled among the massive ancient trees, where a crowd of joyous villagers immediately swarms Akira to celebrate their savior, chanting loudly for him to take over as the official head of their community, resulting in a bizarre coronation where he is draped in traditional robes and handed a ceremonial staff, while the peaceful silence of the forest returns to the clearing where the conflict began. Some time later, Karen reports the somber news that the captive goblin has passed away in prison, leaving Akira to process the weight of the situation with a quiet and respectful nod, until the inspector abruptly shifts the conversation to address his current appearance, questioning the strange new outfit and hairstyle he has adopted as the village's leader, as the young chief reflects on the unexpected events that led to his new position of power. Akira removes the awkward ceremonial headpiece while Karen bluntly remarks that the traditional chief's attire doesn't suit him, although she admits that having a formal village leader makes their future diplomatic relations much more convenient, moving on to report that the rogue goblin captive has been brought to justice under her law, leaving the former office worker to stare in wide-eyed silence as he weighs the news, before he perceptively asks if her military superiors are still feeling unsatisfied with his village's existence, startling the inspector with his sharp intuition while he privately draws parallels to his own past career, recalling a bitter memory of a former boss angrily dismissing his hard work at a cluttered office desk, realizing with a weary sigh that the friction between field workers and upper management is universal, offering a bit of sympathy that the proud warrior quickly rejects while he calmly sips his beverage, leading Karen to formally request that he travel with her to personally persuade her high-ranking commanders, insisting that his articulate presence is the only way to satisfy the doubts of her skeptical superiors, causing him to look toward an empty transport cage while recognizing that the forest's crisis remains unresolved, ultimately deciding that he cannot abandon the villagers who have placed their hopes in his leadership, giving his final consent to the journey as they prepare to depart from the ancient forest clearing, arriving at a massive city built along a wide river with sprawling houses and stone towers, where the local townspeople stop and stare in disbelief at the arrival of an actual goblin, making the young chief visibly nervous as he feels the heavy weight of the public's judgment, traveling through the urban center on horseback alongside Karen while curious crowds gather along the road, attempting to call out to his companion as they pass through a narrow street of traditional houses, admitting with a bashful expression that being the subject of so much public scrutiny is quite embarrassing. Karen asks Akira to endure the situation while they stand beside wooden barrels, explaining that she must take precautions because many citizens are terrified of monsters, prompting the former office worker to nod in nervous understanding, as he realizes he is walking the fine line between being a guest and a captive. Yet he notices the surrounding crowd seems surprisingly cheerful rather than frightened, leading Karen to reveal that his reception is unique specifically because he is a goblin, elaborating that their gentle nature once made them popular pets among the local nobility, which makes sense to Akira since he personally finds his new race quite mascot-like, though Karen adds that the trend died out because of their tragically short lifespans, continuing their trek as children and adults alike gush over his adorable appearance, eventually passing through a set of wrought iron gates into a private estate, letting out a long breath of relief the moment the gates lock behind them, where a formal attendant waits to welcome the travelers to the massive manor, causing Akira to gasp in shock at the high-end surroundings, while he stands frozen before the shimmering chandeliers of a magnificent ballroom, feeling a wave of intense nervousness wash over him in the face of such luxury, quickly requesting a brief moment of privacy to find the nearest restroom, until a polite maid arrives to escort the flustered goblin away, discovering a washroom so ornate that it rivals the splendor of a palace, where he stands bewildered among the polished marble and gold-trimmed fixtures. Akira sits on an ornate, gold-trimmed toilet while looking down in complete embarrassment, finishing his business and quickly adjusting his denim overalls to regain his composure, before wandering through the massive washroom that feels more like a royal greenhouse, eventually peeking through the heavy curtains of a window to observe the courtyard, where a gardener high up on a ladder carefully trims a massive twisted tree, pulling at a specific branch with a hook to secure a clean cut, while using a pair of long-handled shears to prune the dense foliage, until Akira calls out from below to ask about the daily garden maintenance, catching the attention of the elderly man who looks down with visible curiosity, who questions if the small visitor is a captive from the wild, prompting Akira to stand firm and declare he arrived of his own accord, as the gardener climbs down while asking if he intends to attack, which leads the goblin to calmly explain that he only wishes to talk, bringing up the recent tragedy where a goblin took a human life, causing the old man to fall silent and acknowledge the grim news, while Akira boldly states that he has come to take full responsibility, bowing deeply to apologize even though he is not the actual murderer, as the gardener suspects he is only acting to save his village, yet the former office worker shakes his head and denies that simple motivation, explaining that both races must learn from their mistakes to move forward. The gardener simply responds with a confused grunt as he processes the goblin's strange request, before casually asking if his small guest just came from using the mansion's massive restroom, which leads Akira to complain about the lack of practicality in such a needlessly spacious facility, prompting the old man to burst into hearty laughter while calling the designer a total fool, as the goblin frantically warns him to lower his voice before the count overhears the insults, only for the knight Karen to suddenly arrive and address the gardener as the count himself, leaving both the old man and the goblin standing in a moment of awkward silence, until Akira realizes the truth of the man's identity while Karen gasps in horror nearby, leading the knight to immediately seize the goblin and force his head down in apology, while she screams that the man he was just mocking is the mansion's powerful owner, revealing the gardener's true status as Count Orland, the uncle of His Majesty the Emperor, which causes the goblin's eyes to bulge out in absolute shock at his own rudeness, as he points a finger and shouts that he was deliberately tricked by the old man, although the count merely smiles and admits that the honest feedback was quite interesting, dismissing the knight from her duties while signaling for the small goblin to follow him, which leaves Akira wondering if the influential bigwig has actually taken a liking to him, shifting suddenly to a strange dream where the goblin finds himself surrounded by beautiful women, appearing in a different world where he stands before a sign for a local bar, as the hostesses squeal with delight about how cute their new little visitor is, ending with Akira blushing intensely as he is squeezed tightly between the two doting ladies. Count Orland sits comfortably on a plush sofa, laughing while telling the women to call him Simone. From an overhead perspective, the group gathered around the table discusses keeping their meeting a private matter. The count leans in toward the tiny goblin and confesses that he has taken a liking to him. Akira's eyes widen in utter confusion as the old man whispers that he finds him incredibly sexy. Standing tall with a raised fist, the count declares that a man's life has no meaning without sexiness. The goblin clears his throat nervously while the surrounding women look on with gentle smiles. The count lets out a boisterous laugh while the hostesses cling to his arms and advise him to rest. Akira watches the scene with a sweat drop, baffled by the incredibly candid nature of their conversation. Embracing the ladies, the count explains that living life to the fullest is necessary to outshine other men. The small goblin stares back with a stunned expression, asking the old man to clarify his cryptic words. The count stands up again to lecture Akira on the necessity of meeting thousands of people to understand women. He continues his loud laughter while the hostesses lean against him, leaving the goblin completely exhausted. Akira wipes sweat from his brow, realizing that the count's eccentric personality is simply too much to handle. In the lounge, one of the women asks the count how one should go about understanding men. The count closes his eyes and wears a serene smile as he prepares to impart his wisdom. Pointing a finger forward, he gives the surprising advice that a man should engage in gambling. The goblin repeats the suggestion in disbelief as the old man recommends using card games for insight. Visualizations of playing cards and mahjong tiles float above Akira as he contemplates the strange advice. The count insists that a man's true character is only revealed when he is in the middle of a gamble. Looking down at the group once more, the count concludes that men are far simpler to understand than women. Visualizations of men gambling and money flying around illustrate the count's theory on revealing true character. Then, turning the question around, the count asks Akira what he plans to do to understand men. The small goblin sits perched on his seat, taking a moment to consider the profound inquiry. Moments later, Akira touches his chin thoughtfully, his expression turning serious as he prepares to give his answer. Meanwhile, the old man maintains a calm and satisfied smirk while waiting patiently for the goblin to respond. Akira eventually suggests that the best way to understand someone is to observe how they handle their failures. This unexpected bit of wisdom causes the Count to hum in curiosity while eyeing the small creature. Further explaining his point, he notes that men who repeat the same mistakes reveal their true nature. The Count ponders this interesting viewpoint, acknowledging that there are many different ways to perceive human nature. Suddenly realizing his boldness, Akira grows visibly nervous and fears he may have shared far too much. Nearby, the hostesses sit surrounding the table, watching the interaction between the two guests with gentle smiles. Reflecting on his past experiences, Akira notes how unusual it feels to be the center of attention. A brief memory of a different man being pampered by ladies contrasts sharply with his current situation. Declaring the current conversation far too dull, the Count stands up and suggests they admire the beautiful flowers. The old man encourages Akira to enjoy life to its fullest since his time seems limited. In response, Akira attempts to reassure the Count that he is fine despite the grim comment. While sipping his drink, the goblin casually reveals he possesses a skill granting him 80 human years. This revelation visibly shocks the Count, causing his face to twist into an expression of utter disbelief. An awkward silence immediately fills the lounge as the Count and the women stare at the small guest. Nervous sweat beads on Akira's face as he wonders if his revelation was a terrible mistake. Overjoyed by their conversation, the Count tightly grasps Akira's hands and declares him a dear friend. The old man enthusiastically describes the thousands of women Akira could meet throughout his long life. Beneath the light of a full moon, the Count offers to share his secret dreams. When morning arrives, the two leave the lounge while the hostesses bid them a warm farewell. Both companions wear satisfied expressions, agreeing that their time spent together was a great success. Akira waves goodbye while noting that his goblin nature makes it easy to stay active all night. A sudden, sharp scream from down the street instantly captures the attention of the two men. An out-of-control carriage pulled by a white horse thunders through the town, scattering debris everywhere. Akira watches in shock as the vehicle picks up speed and charges toward a vulnerable target. The situation turns dire as a small child is revealed sitting directly in the horse's path. The young boy remains completely oblivious to the danger, calmly playing with a small toy train. Without hesitation, Akira lunges toward the street while shouting for the child to look out. Images of his past self saving another boy from a truck surge through his conscious mind. The goblin digs his feet into the cobblestones, focusing every ounce of his strength for what comes next. He stands his ground against the charging beast, placing himself between the horse and the child. Channeled energy gathers in his fist as he invokes the power of the stone wall skill. Tremors ripple through the earth, causing the heavy paving stones to crack and lift upward. A formidable wall of solid rock bursts from the ground with a thunderous roar. The panicked horse neighs and rears back, unable to overcome the massive obstacle in its way. The stone barrier successfully halts the runaway carriage, saving the little boy from certain disaster. Akira wipes sweat from his brow, exhaling a sigh of relief after the intense rescue. He quickly rushes over to the small boy on the ground to ask if he is all right. The toddler stares back with a look of pure confusion, seemingly unaware of how close he came to tragedy. Nearby townspeople erupt into cheers, celebrating the miraculous intervention they just witnessed. While the boy's parents panic, the child innocently asks the goblin how he summoned the stone wall. A grateful crowd soon surrounds the hero, thanking him profusely for his incredible use of magic. The young boy reaches out and playfully tugs on Akira's long, pointed ear as a sign of affection. Standing at a distance, the Count observes the spectacle while maintaining a watchful eye on his companion. He turns slightly toward a dark alleyway to confirm that his hidden associate is listening nearby. The Count issues a stern command for the mysterious figure to monitor the goblin's every move from now on. A voice from the shadows acknowledges the order, promising to keep the unusual traveler under constant surveillance. Deep in thought, the old man considers the extraordinary potential hidden within the small, persistent goblin. He reflects on the possibility that a long-lived creature of this kind could eventually surpass even a demon lord. During a brief pause in his journey, Akira shares illustrated stories with a group of captivated forest dwellers. Returning to the present, the goblin winces as the energetic child continues to pull hard on his ear. He assures the boy's worried father that he doesn't mind the rough play as long as the child is safe. The peaceful atmosphere is suddenly shattered when a man in formal attire marches forward with a furious shout. The newcomer angrily declares that the damaged carriage belongs to the high-ranking Master Sullivan Jr. He looks down with contempt, demanding to know who is responsible for the creature that blocked the path. Akira looks up in silence, carefully processing the hostile man's words and the mention of the prominent noble. Akira discovers that his elderly travel companion is actually Simone, the kingdom's former prime minister. Glancing toward the carriage, he realizes the man has lived a quiet life since his retirement. Nearby, the hostile official scowls with arrogance while preparing to escalate the tense confrontation. He unleashes a barrage of insults, calling the Count an old geezer and demanding immediate compensation. Maintaining his composure, the retired leader offers a calm apology to the raging man. Akira watches the exchange, noting that his friend is hiding his status to settle things peacefully. The official sneers at the apology, claiming a passenger vital to the current government is inside. Simone listens quietly with his eyes closed, acknowledging the man's increasingly aggressive threats. The goblin senses that the situation is about to turn violent if someone doesn't intervene. While the stranger continues to rant and rave about his master's great importance, Akira reflects on his inherent skills, considering which ability would best reveal the truth. He activates his X-ray vision, peering through the carriage's wooden walls to check for passengers. The man continues his verbal assault, vowing that the travelers will not leave the scene unscathed. Pointing at the vehicle, Akira speaks up and reveals that the coach is actually completely empty. The official is struck with sudden panic, sweating as his deceptive bluff is finally exposed. Taking charge, Simone warns that misusing a noble's crest for personal gain is a serious crime. He fixes the fraud with an intense, authoritative gaze that forces the man to falter. The man's confidence evaporates instantly as he gasps in terror at the Count's intimidating aura. Local guards arrive on the scene to apprehend the criminal as townspeople look on. Akira and his companion observe in silence while the noisy troublemaker is finally dragged away. The arrested fraud spits out a final death threat as guards drag him away. Bound and humiliated, the man is led off to face punishment for his crimes. He looks back in total disbelief, still reeling from the sudden collapse of his scheme. Simone expresses deep gratitude toward Akira, insisting that the goblin's intervention saved him from serious trouble. Smiling warmly, the retired statesman pledges to personally guarantee the safety of Akira's hidden village. Akira reacts with wide-eyed shock at the unexpected news of such a powerful endorsement. Simone further explains that the goblin settlement will now be recognized as an autonomous territory. The Count adds a single condition, appointing the knight Karen to serve as a temporary overseer. Akira feels a sense of relief, trusting that Karen's reasonable nature will make the transition smooth. The story shifts back to the peaceful goblin village where dome-shaped homes line the forest clearing. Arriving home, Akira enthusiastically tells his people that the threat of human subjugation is finally over. The villagers cheer wildly, praising their leader's incredible diplomatic success on behalf of the tribe. A few female goblins become overly excited, showering Akira with romantic attention and playful demands. Regaining control of the situation, the chief explains that they must now establish new laws. Nearby, Karen stands watch in the woods, observing the goblins' lively celebration from a distance. Akira announces the village's first major rule is to strictly forbid the killing of any humans. Karen listens intently to the decree, her expression remaining guarded and professional while she works. In a secret meeting, Simone instructs the knight to report any suspicious activity immediately. Reflecting on her orders, she realizes the weight of the responsibility the Count has placed on her. She resolves to complete her undercover surveillance mission without letting the goblin chief notice her presence. Akira finishes listing the village rules and asks those with offensive skills to step forward. The goblin children eagerly raise their hands, clamoring to be recognized by their chief. Karen approaches the goblin leader with her arms crossed, demanding to know his plan. Nearby, the young goblins tremble in fear at the sight of the imposing human warrior. Sensing their distress, Akira quickly introduces Karen as an ally to ease their worries. Karen declares herself an inspector, promising safety as long as they follow the law. Her stern announcement backfires, leaving the tiny villagers even more terrified than before. The little goblins huddle together with teary eyes, overwhelmed by the knight's presence. Seeing their frightened reactions, Karen breaks her professional composure and starts to sweat. She takes a deep breath, realizing her cold demeanor is scaring the children. Softening her expression, she kneels to a child's level and introduces herself kindly. The children's fear turns to adoration as they marvel at her sudden warmth and kindness. Akira continues his explanation, suggesting they establish a garrison to keep things organized. Karen listens with a skeptical look, questioning the feasibility due to their short lifespans. The chief confidently assures her that he has a clever solution for that problem. Pointing to one of the boys, Akira declares that his new name will be Hanzo. Karen stares back with a blank expression, completely missing the cultural reference. Akira smugly reflects on the lineage of the name he chose for his new recruit. Although he explains his logic, the knight remains utterly baffled by the strange naming choice. The young goblin celebrates with a determined fist, fully accepting his new name of Hanzo. Akira elaborates on the naming system where future generations inherit the title of Hanzo upon a predecessor's passing, explaining how every newborn possessing offensive skills will be integrated into this specialized combat unit. The young goblins respond with a collective shout of understanding and loyalty to their leader. Karen watches from the sidelines, noting how deeply the tiny villagers idolize and respect the chief. Transitioning to administrative needs, Akira calls for any goblins with innate abilities in appraisal or accounting. He observes that only 3 children step forward, indicating that such intellectual skills are quite rare. A small goblin cheers excitedly after being officially designated as Kinokuniya I. Akira details how this merchant role will manage trade with humans while others handle internal justice. His vision involves a continuous lineage of specialized roles that persist even when individuals die. The chief beams with pride, confident that this system perfectly addresses the goblins' naturally short lifespans. Karen remains silent, her expression betraying a mix of bewilderment and growing concern at his ingenuity. She realizes that this entity in a goblin's body is far more dangerous than any typical demon. The female knight stands tall in her gleaming armor, her resolve hardening as the village's nature shifts. Sunlight filters through the dense canopy of the surrounding forest as a quiet stream flows nearby. Suddenly, an energetic goblin runs toward the chief, shouting for him to witness a new discovery. Akira looks up with a start, his wide eyes fixed on whatever the young scout has found. The goblin proudly presents a battered human man who has been securely bound to a thick tree trunk. Blinking in surprise, the chief asks the third-generation Hanzo for an explanation regarding the captive. The young warrior boasts about his success, proving that the new name succession system is working flawlessly. Akira reflects on the situation, noting that almost everything in his grand design is unfolding exactly as planned. The third-generation Hanzo reports that he captured a human trespasser alive after being attacked during his forest patrol, confirming with a broad grin that he was strictly following the village chief's newly established combat protocols. Akira observes the scene with a focused gaze while considering the strategic value of the human captive. A detailed assessment of the man's condition reveals that his wounds will take several weeks to fully heal. The chief initially instructs the young scout to deliver the prisoner directly into Karen's custody. But he pauses when he notices the warrior acting uncharacteristically nervous and twitchy. Akira teases the boy for being bashful, which only makes the young goblin even more flustered. With a bright blush, Hanzo explains that he made a promise to start a family once his work ended. The chief's expression turns to one of pure terror as he recognizes the statement as a dangerous death flag. He thinks gloomily about the harsh reality of their race, where such efforts often end in immediate tragedy. Quickly changing his orders, Akira tells the scout that he will handle the prisoner himself from now on. He encourages the young man to go fulfill his romantic promise immediately rather than making the person wait. Hanzo III is overcome with joy, his face lighting up with a mixture of shock and gratitude. Sprinting away into the forest, the scout shouts a final thank you to his leader for the leave. Akira turns back to the bound trespasser, intending to find Karen and complete the transfer as planned. She suddenly speaks up from behind a massive tree trunk, startling the chief with her silent arrival. The female knight steps forward with her arms crossed, looking remarkably composed despite the recent commotion. She reveals that she was listening the entire time and heard his peculiar conversation with the young scout. Locking eyes with the goblin, she softly remarks that she knows a human who behaves exactly like him. Akira can only blink in complete confusion, repeating her words as he tries to process the strange comparison. Akira describes himself as someone who naturally takes on the responsibilities of others. Karen expresses her fascination with the system of inheriting names over multiple generations. The chief explains that his desired results are finally manifesting in the third generation. He directs her attention toward the prisoner as she questions his definition of success. The human captive remains unconscious and bound tightly to the base of a tree. Akira lists the various injuries the man suffered during the encounter in the woods. A small goblin foot steps quietly onto the forest floor during the flashback sequence. The demonstration displays a variety of magical skills including stone blasts and flame blades. A small animal drifts into a magical slumber caused by a specialized sleeping breeze. Roaring flames engulf the trunk of a tree as an offensive magic activates. Sharp rocks pelt the same target in a display of coordinated elemental force. The chief explains that these abilities were intentionally selected from the same skill group. Karen notes that goblins traditionally transfer their skills only when they are near death. Akira mentions that such inheritance was completely random before he implemented his new system. He illustrates the inefficiency of a scholarly goblin accidentally inheriting massive physical strength. The narrator describes how humans strategically pair individuals with similar abilities to synchronize skills. The knight realizes the logical brilliance behind the village's structured name succession system. Akira points out a group of warriors who have all inherited complementary combat abilities. He reveals that possessing multiple matching skills was once an exceptionally rare feat. The protagonist reflects on the specific wish he made after being struck by a truck. Akira explains that his dying wish was to pass his skills to another person. He recalls intending to transfer his knowledge to a colleague named Takahashi in his past life. The narrator explains that goblins possess this inheritance trait but typically pass skills at random. The protagonist emphasizes that his people can achieve great growth despite their incredibly short lifespans. Karen listens with a serious expression as she realizes the depth of his village management. Standing in the forest, she warns that humans will inevitably see them as a threat. Akira gestures while promising to prevent any goblin hostility toward humanity as long as he is present. Karen stands with crossed arms and agrees to let him live for 80 years. Thin clouds drift across the sky above the dense forest as the conversation ends. Deep in the woods, the scene shifts to an area filled with massive ancient trees. A mysterious figure in a white cloak runs through the forest while evading capture. Voices of pursuers ring out as the girl desperately searches for an escape route. She continues her frantic sprint through the undergrowth while breathing heavily from the exertion. A unique tracking ability activates to help her locate a powerful presence in the woods. The girl stops in her tracks when she senses an overwhelming aura nearby. She looks toward a vision of the demon lord and confirms his continued existence. Determined to reach her destination, the fugitive vows not to fail in her mission. The young demon girl reveals her face and smiles at the thought of meeting her lord. Back in the village, a quill scratches across parchment as the daily records are written. Akira leans back with his hands behind his head and exhales after a long day. Akira sits uncomfortably at his desk while lamenting the lack of quality goblin furniture. He envisions forming a craftsmanship group to improve the village's woodworking capabilities. A sudden knock on the door interrupts his thoughts and planning session. Karen steps into the room and finds the goblin leader busy at his workstation. She inquires about his current task while he reveals he is drafting a simple law. The protagonist explains that this specific legislation is intended for human eyes to see. He argues that formal laws are necessary to convince humanity of their village's autonomy. Karen asks if he intends to establish a legal framework for legitimate self-defense. She questions whether goblins even understand the concept since they didn't use it before. A brief memory surfaces of a goblin being held accountable for a past transgression. Akira begins to sketch a diagram to explain his unique diplomatic philosophy. He draws two circles on a page that intersect to represent a shared middle ground. The leader explains that successful negotiations require finding the overlap between two opposing groups. Karen watches intently as the goblin leader continues his logical breakdown of human relations. He uses the diagram to show how presenting a convincing narrative is the key. Akira questions if humans would have been swayed by a simple plea for self-defense. He explains that phrasing a punishment strategically can make it seem harsher to outsiders. The young leader points out that those with less power must be insistent. Karen takes a moment to absorb the depth of his political maneuvering and foresight. The pair continues their serious discussion inside the quiet hut as night falls. Karen marvels at Akira's ability to plan so far ahead based on a single incident. She considers his unique strategy of giving goblins names and acknowledges his exceptional nature. The knight decides that she must report his growth to her superiors after seeing his potential. Karen watches Akira work and concludes that his intelligence makes him a genuine threat on the surface. She stares at the focused goblin leader and wonders if he truly grasps his own capabilities. A thunderous scream suddenly vibrates through the hut and interrupts their quiet conversation. Outside, goblin villagers run in terror as a mysterious disturbance sends them fleeing for safety. The panicked group notices their leader and screams for the village chief to help them. Akira looks on with an expression of pure bewilderment as the village peace is shattered. He peers down at the village center where a group of young goblins has cornered a small intruder. A girl with horns and dark markings under her eyes questions if they are using shadow clones. She snaps at the goblins for their perceived insolence while preparing a powerful counterattack. The girl releases a wave of energy that causes several goblin illusions to dissipate into thin air. The remaining goblin warrior winces in shock as he witnesses the easy destruction of his clones. With a single, forceful push, the girl sends the last standing goblin hurtling across the clearing. The warrior slams into a nearby building and leaves a crater in the wall from the force. He groans in agony while trying to regain his breath after the devastating blow. An ominous shadow hand looms over the fallen goblin as the intruder closes the distance. The girl narrows her eyes and demands a final answer to her interrogation with a threatening reach. Akira arrives at the scene and yells for her to stop before any further damage is done. Akira demands to know the identity of the intruder and the reason for her sudden assault. The girl looks back with a cold gaze and asks who he is in return. Akira stands firm and introduces himself as the leader and chief of the village. Accepting his status, she prepares to interrogate him regarding a matter of great importance. She demands to know the location of the demon lord who was supposed to be in the area. Both Akira and Karen are visibly shaken by the mention of the legendary Dark Ruler. Akira narrows his eyes as he tries to make sense of the girl's strange quest. The intruder scrutinizes the goblins and wonders if they are minions or kin of her target. Karen insists the demon lord is dead, prompting a violent and angry denial from the girl. The girl, calling herself Kuro, claims she can sense that the demon lord still exists. She activates her skill search ability to detect the specific magical signature she seeks. Akira suddenly begins to emit a blinding radiance as the search skill identifies him. Kuro's eyes widen in utter shock as her tracking ability points directly at the goblin chief. The surrounding forest is illuminated by the intense light pouring out from Akira's small frame. Kuro trembles with rage and demands to know why he possesses the demon lord's unique skills. The village chief reels in confusion as he hears the impossible question leveled against him. Karen looks on with growing concern as she witnesses the mysterious energy surrounding her companion. The girl decides that Akira is the true object of her search and points toward him. Her expression twists into a mask of pure hatred as she prepares to unleash her fury. She screams that Akira is the murderer who killed the demon lord and stole his power. Kuro lunges forward with a powerful punch that shatters the ground beneath her. The impact creates a cloud of dust as the villagers watch in terror. Akira pleads with the enraged girl to calm down and listen to his explanation. Disregarding his words, Kuro screams her intent to kill the goblin chief. Realizing words are useless, Akira decides he must restrain her to end the violence. He summons a barrage of magical chains that wrap tightly around Kuro's body. The girl bristles with fury as she is ensnared by the binding spell. With a burst of overwhelming strength, Kuro shatters the metal links into pieces. Akira gazes in disbelief at the raw power contained within her small frame. Kuro charges again, her fist smashing into the earth as Akira narrowly evades. The goblin chief analyzes her reckless head-on attacks as rocks fly through the air. He prepares a counter-strategy while Kuro leaps forward for another strike. The girl takes a heavy blow and winces in pain as the battle intensifies. She is sent flying backward by the force of Akira's defensive maneuver. A second set of chains rapidly winds around her before she can recover. Kuro is slammed into the dirt, pinned firmly to the ground by the spell. She struggles against her bonds and demands to be released immediately. Her eyes burn with intense hatred as she repeats her accusations of murder. Akira stands over her with a calm expression, waiting for her rage to subside. He looks her in the eye and asks what the demon lord truly meant to her. Kuro gasps in surprise as she finds herself completely immobilized by the binding chains. She vehemently defends the character of the demon lord against Akira's direct questioning. The confrontation intensifies as the goblin challenges her assumptions about his supposed treachery. Akira pushes further by asking if such a great leader would ever be so easily deceived. Nearby, a mysterious young woman watches the unfolding drama from a quiet distance. She observes with a skeptical expression while considering the logic of the goblin's argument. A heavy silence falls over Kuro as she finally begins to reflect on his words. Akira then asks why a murderer would be granted the demon lord's special skills. Noticing her hesitation, he realizes that he is finally making progress with her. Kuro remains pinned to the dirt, her murderous rage slowly turning into deep confusion. Akira continues by explaining that the power was actually entrusted to him personally. He then speaks the specific parting words that were shared during his final meeting. Hearing the familiar phrasing of her master, Kuro's face pales with sudden realization. Akira shifts the subject to ask if she understands the unique biological traits of goblins. She remembers that his race can reproduce skills through a special soul-bound testament. Shaking with emotion, Kuro grabs the goblin and asks if that voice was real. Akira meets her gaze and tells her she should know that voice better than anyone. The crushing weight of the truth finally breaks her long-held resentment and anger. Tears begin to stream down her face as her heart finally accepts the reality. She collapses into a fit of grief while wailing for her lost master. Akira watches in silence as Kuro collapses to the ground in a fit of uncontrollable grief, her heart-wrenching cries echoing through the forest while she mourns the loss of her master. Far away in a grand estate, an elderly man slams his hand onto a table in disbelief. The Count stands before a stained glass window, questioning how a goblin could possess the demon lord's skill. Sweating with anxiety, he wonders if this signifies a divine plan to overthrow the human race. Meanwhile, a young demon girl stands alone in the woods near a crackling campfire. The scene shifts back to the sprawling gardens and ornate stone arches of the Count's mansion. Inside his private study, the Count sits motionless before a complex strategy game known as charanga. A young maid enters the quiet room and stands patiently before her troubled master. She looks at him with concern, asking what could possibly be weighing so heavily on his mind. He admits that no matter how much he thinks, he remains at a severe disadvantage. Pointing toward the game board, he asks the girl if she is familiar with its rules. He explains that a certain unique mechanic makes it impossible for him to claim victory. The maid listens intently, clearly puzzled by the mention of such a lopsided rule. Gripping a wooden piece, the Count describes how the game involves capturing the opponent's forces. He reveals that while his captured pieces simply disappear, his opponent can redeploy them against him. The girl gasps in shock, declaring that such a system is fundamentally unfair to any player. Closing his eyes in frustration, the Count grimly agrees with her assessment of the situation. The board reveals a lopsided state where many pieces are stacked up as reserves. He lets out a weary sigh as the weight of his strategic failure finally sinks in. The Count concludes that the Demon Lord's unique skill is just as inherently unfair as the game. Meanwhile, Kuro stands alone amongst the dome-shaped goblin dwellings, wiping away her persistent tears. Akira observes from a distance, musing that her embarrassment stems from losing composure before a complete stranger. He adjusts his glasses while considering the best way to help the young demon girl. Noting that her current traveling outfit is heavily worn, he calls out for the village tailor. A stout goblin merchant known as the fourth-generation Ekigoya steps forward to answer the summons. Akira recalls how he modeled the tailor group after legendary kimono shops from his previous life. Turning back to the visitor, he politely asks the girl for her formal name. She looks up with a determined expression and introduces herself properly as Kuro. Akira repeats the name with a friendly smile, officially welcoming her to the village. He gestures toward her and asks Ekigoya if crafting a new outfit for her is possible. The tailor confidently snaps his fingers, declaring the task to be a piece of cake. Suddenly a team of goblin assistants rushes over and surrounds the startled girl. Without warning, they hoist Kuro high into the air to carry her to the workshop. She panics and flails her limbs, demanding to know what they are doing to her. Despite her protests and a stray kick to a goblin's face, Akira tells her to stop struggling. His gaze intensifies as he mentally prepares her for the rules governing his monstrous community. Seeing no other choice, Kuro finally yields to the tailors and accepts her current situation. The group carries her off toward the dome houses while Akira watches the chaotic procession. The blonde knight commander crosses her arms and remarks on how much trouble the girl brings. A gang of energetic goblin children suddenly swarms Karen and starts dragging her toward the village. The knight commander cries out in sheer confusion, wondering why she is also being forced along. She is whisked away toward the cluster of dome houses as a resident goblin waves a friendly farewell. Watching the scene, a young goblin apprentice in overalls feels that the commander finally fits in. The narrative shifts toward the quiet exterior of the village workshops located under the shade of trees. Inside her dome-shaped room, the bespectacled goblin girl is startled from her work by a knock. She gazes toward the entrance with her mouth agape, completely stunned by who has just walked in. Karen and Kuro stand before the villagers while wearing incredibly intricate and feminine dresses. The apprentice goblin leans in to get a better look at the craftsmanship of Kuro's frilly new gown. Akira notes that his village's production capabilities have expanded to include sewing, leatherwork, and spinning. The apprentice asks Ekigoya if he sewed the clothes, and he confirms his handiwork. She remains mesmerized by the quality of the work, staring intently at the demon girl's transformation. Noticing a particular fold in the fabric, she speaks up to get the attention of the flustered Kuro. The demon girl blushes intensely while tugging at her lace collar, questioning the necessity of the dress. The apprentice responds that her natural cuteness would be wasted on the tattered clothes she arrived in. Hearing this, Kuro begins to tremble and turn bright red as the direct compliment hits home. She glances away and asks if the goblin girl is actually pleased by how she looks now. The apprentice nods and explains that the sheer variety in girls' clothing makes her work truly fun. Kuro suddenly spins around and shouts at Ekigoya to prepare an entirely different outfit for her. Karen and the apprentice stand awkwardly together as a frantic commotion breaks out just out of sight. Kuro aggressively shakes Ekigoya while shouting for a brand new outfit to be made immediately. Karen and the apprentice stand in awkward silence as a faint cry drifts from afar. Feeling deeply flustered, the knight commander begs the cheerful goblin girl to stop the compliments. The apprentice remains persistent and continues to insist that the dress fits her beautifully. Karen turns her head away in silence while a heavy blush spreads across her face. She quickly pivots the conversation to the astounding feel of the high-quality fabric she wears. Running her hand over the gown, she marvels at the advanced weaving technology Ekigoya developed. The apprentice suggests that they could eventually share this superior technique with human society. He explains that unique goblin skills are often lost shortly after being passed to successors. His plan involves handing the knowledge over to humans to ensure it remains useful. He further considers the possibility of selling the technology to generate significant patent revenue. Karen stares down at him and asks if he truly intends to become a demon lord. The young goblin looks up with a confused expression and a nervous sweat. Kuro suddenly shouts an accusation about him stealing power from the fallen demon lord. He laughs off the ridiculous theory while Karen watches him with a skeptical gaze. Shifting into a serious mood, he notes that the demon lord's mistake was isolationism. He reveals that he studied the demon lord's history using books borrowed from Karen. Gesturing firmly, he explains that using power solely for oneself makes one a global enemy. Karen listens intently and asks if this altruistic philosophy drives his plan for the clothes. With a confident grin, he declares that he will not repeat the failures of the past. Kuro poses energetically in her stylish new dress while the village girls admire the craftsmanship. Overlooking the settlement, several dome-shaped stone houses stand nestled among the thick forest trees. Within one of the quiet dwellings, an elderly goblin woman lies on her deathbed surrounded by kin. She looks up with a weary smile and weakly calls out for the village chief to approach. Leaning in close to the bed, Akira listens intently as the dying woman shares her last thoughts. She speaks fondly of her long life, her 6 children, and the happiness she found in the village. Showing deep respect, the chief acknowledges her words with a gentle and understanding nod. The old goblin offers her final thanks and passes away peacefully with a serene expression. A glowing orb of light suddenly rises from her body and drifts toward Akira's open palm. The shimmering essence of her life floats into the air within the quiet, somber room. A magical notification appears to confirm that Akira has inherited the common heal skill once again. Outside the dwelling, the bright sun shines down through the dense canopy of the forest. The village tradition continues as the goblins begin a lively funeral party filled with song. Sitting on a nearby log, Akira observes his people as they feast and dance together. He stares at his own hand while contemplating the weight of the many lives he carries. He realizes that this is the 5th time he has inherited this specific redundant healing power. Looking back on his leadership, he notes he has already absorbed over 300 distinct skills. He recalls being personally requested to facilitate the inheritance for this respected elder today. Considering the surplus of abilities, he reflects on his decision to establish the name succession system. He concludes that distributing these skills among the shorter-lived goblins is the best path forward for the tribe. Akira sits on a log, thinking about the redundancy of his skills and feeling it's a waste. Kuro approaches him while wearing her new white dress and calls out to him. Noticing her presence, Akira looks up with a cheerful smile and greets her warmly. Kuro stands before him with a slightly uncertain and bashful expression on her face. Looking at her, Akira wonders if she is feeling anxious about the quality of her work. He recalls his previous life as an office worker and compares her to a nervous new employee. Deciding to offer some encouragement, he prepares to give her some positive feedback on her outfit. When he tells her the dress looks good on her, Kuro reacts with shocked disbelief and embarrassment. Blushing intensely, she flails her arms and loudly claims that such flattery does not make her happy. Akira maintains a calm and sincere expression while insisting that he is telling the truth. Overwhelmed by his direct compliment, the horned girl clutches her chest and lets out a flustered sound. She tries to hide her joy by claiming she only wears it because her old clothes were worn out. Akira smiles gently at her reaction before deciding to change the subject to something more serious. Kuro listens intently as the chief brings up a question regarding her remaining lifespan. Sitting back comfortably, Akira explains that he possesses a special skill that grants him 80 years of life. Shocked by this revelation, Kuro shouts in disbelief at the existence of such an incredible ability. She stares at him with wide eyes, completely stunned by the concept of a long-lived goblin. Turning away slightly, she admits that the rumors about goblins possessing many varied skills must be true. As they watch the village children play near a fire, Akira explains how their short cycles accumulate diversity. Kuro remains deep in thought, admitting she has never heard of a skill that extends life so significantly. Kuro wonders if his ability is a unique skill like the ones possessed by the Demon Lord. Akira tilts his head in curiosity, asking if a unique skill is limited to a single person. The horned girl silently confirms his suspicion with a small nod of her head. She goes on to mention that while her own skills are not unique, they are exceptionally rare. Holding up 2 fingers, she identifies her specific abilities as Skill Search and Far Sight. She points out that he has already witnessed her using Skill Search to find the Demon Lord. Standing up, Akira surprises her by revealing that he also possesses the Far Sight ability. He explains that it allows him to see objects up to a full kilometer away. The dense forest scenery comes into sharp focus through the power of his enhanced vision. Akira's eyes begin to glow with a brilliant intensity as he activates the skill. Smiling back at him, Kuro agrees and prepares to demonstrate her own version of the ability. She triggers Farsight, sending a sharp beam of light from her eyes into the distance. Together, the pair stand with their eyes shining brightly while shouting in excitement. Villagers watch the two from a distance, amused by how well they seem to be bonding. Without warning, a strange shimmering light begins to envelop Kuro's entire body. She becomes visibly distressed, shouting in confusion as the magical aura intensifies around her. Akira looks on with a worried expression as the glowing energy continues to fluctuate. He suddenly winces in pain, closing his eyes tightly as if something is reacting within him. The same mysterious light begins to radiate from Akira, catching him completely off guard. Glowing orbs float around his hands while he stares at the manifestation of this new power. Kuro undergoes a sudden skill evolution as 2 far sight abilities merge into clairvoyance. She gasps in disbelief while witnessing the strange magical phenomenon affecting her body. Akira encourages her to immediately test the capabilities of the newly formed ability. Her eyes expand and glow with mystical energy as she focuses her vision. A detailed landscape of a distant city appears with incredible clarity before her eyes. She celebrates the massive upgrade, realizing her sight reaches further than ever before. Meanwhile, Akira falls into a quiet contemplation while examining his own hands. He explains that he seems to have lost both far sight and clairvoyance entirely. Kuro looks on with wonder and asks if he can perform another miracle. A sudden burst of realization makes Akira shout, causing Kuro to fall over in shock. She stares at him in bewilderment, asking for an explanation for his sudden outburst. He announces with a confident grin that he finally knows how to utilize extra skills. The pair later takes a break to feast on a large roast during a celebration. The whole village eventually gathers around a warm bonfire in the woods to rest. Kuro and her companions watch with curiosity as Akira prepares his next move. Akira stands across from a young goblin named Hanzo beside the crackling fire. Hanzo smiles brightly while waiting to see what Akira has planned for him. The narrative identifies the boy as a brave leader from the earlier village defense. Akira asks for confirmation that Hanzo possesses the specific and powerful clone skill. A glowing orb of light manifests between them as Akira begins the skill transfer. Hanzo reacts with shock as a magical vortex transforms his basic clone skill into Shadow Clone. Then he shouts in excitement about the amazing sensation while the onlookers watch the transformation. As a result, the young goblin begins to vibrate with intense energy to activate his ability. Moments later, 3 identical versions of Hanzo appear simultaneously amidst clouds of magical smoke. Kuro stares at the trio in stunned silence while processing the incredible sight before her. Soon she questions how this new technique differs from his previous duplication power. In response, all 3 Hanzos exclaim in unison that they are all the original entity. They continue to boast about their shared consciousness while she tries to distinguish between them. Observing from the side, the demon companion notes that they all appear perfectly real. She explains that the skill is formidable because an opponent cannot target a main body. Her analysis continues by noting that every single clone must be defeated to win. Meanwhile, the Hanzos proudly confirm that they are both the source and the clone. Kuro eventually concludes that this new ability is vastly superior to the original skill. A loud cheer erupts from the village as Akira calls for a celebration in Hanzo's honor. Watching the festivities, Kuro marvels at the goblin's ability to party over any small success. Suddenly, a firm hand reaches out and catches the demon girl's attention with a grab. She turns around with a look of surprise at the sudden physical contact from behind. Hanzo steps forward with newfound confidence to challenge her to an immediate rematch. She responds with a cheeky grin, promising to humble the goblin once again in combat. The surrounding villagers roar with excitement while cheering for both fighters to begin their duel. Hanzo lunges forward with a powerful punch while maintaining a fierce expression. Kuro maintains a playful smirk as she readies herself for the incoming strike. Nearby goblins cheer enthusiastically as the two combatants exchange blows in the clearing. Simone observes the match with crossed arms and acknowledges Akira's constant ability to surprise her. She stares ahead while pondering the incredible implications of evolving skills through cooperation. Akira notices that she changed back into her armor, and she replies that she is on duty. The pair strolls through the village while discussing how even they were caught off guard. Akira admits that he would have attempted this much sooner had he been aware of the possibility. Magical energy swirls in a diagram explaining the fusion of identical skills into a higher rank. An illustration details how his donated skill combined with Hanzo's to create the shadow technique. Simone questions whether this evolutionary process can be replicated with any partner. Akira pauses to reflect on the mechanics of his unique ability while adjusting his thoughts. The knight suggests that the phenomenon might be a trait exclusive to the goblin race. A brief recollection of Kuro's transformation confirms that the skill works with other monsters too. Simone considers the possibility that this power only applies to non-human entities. Akira's mind drifts back to a memory of his former life standing near a large vehicle. A blinding light symbolizes the moment he was chosen for this world after an online search. He adjusts his glasses while realizing that today's success has confirmed a deep-seated suspicion. Looking at the happy villagers, he concludes that this world is a manifestation of his wishes. A colleague in his past life congratulates him on becoming a certified public accountant. Akira recalls a dinner from his past life where he discussed his previous career as a tax counselor. He walks through the woods and notes how human development in this world mirrors his former life. Kneeling on the ground, he uses a thin branch to scratch a grid into the dirt. Simone watches his actions with a bewildered expression as he continues to draw the lines. He explains the mechanics of a turn-based board game where players move pieces and capture opponents. Simone identifies the game as charanga while a vision of a complex chess board appears behind her. Akira clarifies that the version he is familiar with is called shogi. He highlights the specific rule that allows players to reuse any piece they have captured from the enemy. Simone points out that charanga's pieces are strictly divided by color and cannot be repurposed after capture. The two conclude that her version is identical to the game of chess from Akira's old world. A detailed illustration shows how shogi pieces can switch sides to join the captor's army. Sitting on the ground, Akira ponders if the rules of his desired world also apply to skills. He decides that telling Simone the truth about his reincarnation theory would be far too absurd. He worries that a goblin monopoly on evolving skills could make his race a massive global threat. Simone remains silent as she processes the implications of their conversation with a serious gaze. Akira considers the benefits of sharing his ability with trustworthy recipients regardless of their race. A sudden outburst of shouting from the distance interrupts their walk and puts them on edge. Both of them stop in their tracks and turn toward the source of the commotion with wide eyes. They find a small goblin running desperately toward a group of 4 armed human adventurers. Akira reacts with intense shock as he realizes he has finally encountered other humans in the wild. A smug human adventurer sneers as he promises to exterminate everyone he considers to be a pest. The demon girl stands alone in a stream while adjusting her hair amidst the quiet forest. Hanzo the goblin launches a desperate punch that the smug man blocks with a single palm. The other adventurers look on with boredom and suggest that their leader finish the job quickly. Hearing the commotion, the goblin village chief rushes toward the clearing where his people are gathered. The demon girl and a young goblin explain that the humans attacked without any provocation. Processing the dire situation, the village chief listens to the report with a grim expression. He boldly steps into the middle of the confrontation and orders both sides to stop fighting. The smug human agrees to the pause while Hanzo remains tense and ready for another strike. Without warning, the man delivers a brutal kick that sends the small goblin tumbling backward. Hanzo skids across the ground in a cloud of dust as the chief cries out. Though clearly injured, the brave goblin insists that he is fine while clutching his stomach. A look of pure rage crosses the village chief's face as he stares at the attacker. He demands an explanation for the man's continued violence against someone who had stopped fighting. The adventurer dismisses the complaint by stating he was merely attacking a monster. He shows zero remorse and asks why the goblin's lack of aggression should even matter. The village chief remains silent while his anger continues to boil over the human's cruelty. Another member of the human party impatiently asks for the identity of the gathered group. The lead adventurer maintains a cold gaze as he prepares to explain their objective. He points his finger directly at the demon girl and declares they are only hunting her. The village chief stares intensely while questioning the humans about their specific interest in the girl. Reacting with a condescending smirk, the lead adventurer mockingly repeats the question back at him. He identifies her as a remnant of the defeated demon lord's army with a cold gaze. When the chief asks if she ever harmed people, the man insists that she undoubtedly did. The small goblin looks up in shock at the human's baseless and certain accusation. Offering a deal, the man promises to spare the village if they simply surrender the girl. Kuro begins to tremble with suppressed fury as her eyes take on a menacing glow. The chief attempts to de-escalate by reminding the intruders that the count granted this village autonomy. A wave of mocking laughter erupts from the human party as they stand in the forest. Leaning in, the leader dismisses any connection the goblins might have with the local nobility. The chief remains firm and asks directly if they have the count's permission for this raid. Towering over the small elder, the man reiterates his complete lack of concern for legalities. With a serious tone, the chief makes an official appeal for the intruders to leave immediately. A heavy silence falls over the clearing as the adventurers process the tiny goblin's bold demand. The tension snaps as the humans double over in hysterical and cruel laughter. They continue to jeer at the chief, calling him a self-important brat for his formal appeal. The mockery echoes through the trees while the chief stands undeterred by their insults. Karen, one of the party members, closes her eyes and confirms that her task is complete. The leader smugly declares that they have followed every protocol to ensure they are legally protected. Nearby, a young goblin focuses his magic to heal the injury on Hanzo's abdomen. A young goblin with glasses beams with pride while praising Hanzo for his courage. Hanzo turns back with a look of immense gratitude toward the village chief. The chief gives the final signal for his people to stop holding back against the invaders. Looking down with a shadowed gaze, the human leader lets out a dark chuckle. His amusement boils over into a bout of hysterical laughter that rings through the clearing. Drawing a hilt of fine craftsmanship, the man mockingly dismisses the threat posed by the goblins. A sudden burst of energy kicks up dust from the forest floor as movements accelerate. The village chief focuses his resolve and forms a specific hand seal with determination. His fingers move in a rapid blur of complicated gestures to activate a powerful technique. Smoke billows as 3 identical copies of the chief materialize through a shadow clone spell. The human leader maintains a smug expression while taunting the goblin's use of duplication magic. He begins a derogatory sentence about the goblin's status while his team stands ready. Without warning, several flashes of light strike the leader's companions with immense force. The impact sends the human party members flying backward as their weapons fall to the ground. A look of genuine confusion replaces the leader's arrogant smirk as he realizes he is alone. He whips his head around in a sudden realization of the threat behind him. His fallen allies lie scattered across the dirt while the forest remains silent. A blur of movement follows as a clone delivers a swift chop to the back of his neck. The leader face plants into the earth as his ornate dagger slips from his grasp. The village chief wipes his brow with a weary but triumphant smile over his success. The goblin villagers erupt in joyous celebration over Hanzo's victory and eagerly anticipate continuing their interrupted party. Festivities resume with a bounty of fresh fruit while Simone stands quietly in the background observing the scene. A young goblin offers the knight a basket of bread as Hanzo notices her uncharacteristically sour expression. Simone gazes off with a troubled look, contemplating the hectic times that surely lie ahead for the village. Looking up with concern, Hanzo asks if there could really be any trouble after following proper defensive procedures. The knightly woman acknowledges his point with a hesitant look while remaining wary of the broader consequences. They both turn their attention toward the 4 influential humans who now lie defeated and bound. Hanzo reacts with pure shock upon hearing just how much trouble these particular captives might bring. The defeated invaders remain securely tied to a tree with dazed expressions and swirly eyes from the combat. Simone takes a moment of peace to lounge on a sofa and study her collection of books. Simone reiterates her warning that the human military will likely be alerted to the goblin's formidable power. Hanzo stares intensely through his vine glasses while contemplating the sudden gravity of their victory. Bundled together with sturdy ropes, the humans remain completely incapacitated while the forest shadows loom over them. Despite the looming threat, the rest of the village continues their lively celebration around a roaring campfire. Hanzo recalls how the human leader acted like a stereotypical villain despite his supposed high status. The goblin's eyes widen as he remembers the arrogance of the men who tried to seize their autonomy. Simone tilts her head in confusion after overhearing Hanzo muttering strange comments to himself about phony villains. She explains that the group's reputation for subjugating monsters is what makes them appear superior to others. Silence falls over Hanzo as he absorbs the explanation and considers the village's next move. He shakes his head dismissively when Simone asks if he is currently plotting a clever way to deceive their enemies. Hanzo insists that true power cannot be hidden or falsified. Simone questions if he is prepared for the inevitable human suspicion. A mental image illustrates how over-secrecy only breeds further doubt and mistrust. The villagers continue their meal while justifying their self-defense as a necessity. Hanzo looks away to contemplate the long-term diplomatic strategy for his people. He stands in quiet reflection regarding the need for negotiation on equal terms. Simone watches him closely after noticing his sudden lapse into deep thought. Hanzo envisions a crowded city while worrying about how the general public reacts. He compares the ruling styles of his human allies to leaders from his past. The group acknowledges that fear might spread if a monster hunter's defeat is known. A plan begins to form as Hanzo decides to appeal to human emotions. A decorative screen signals the passing of time and a change in scenery. The story transitions to a sprawling view of a picturesque human mountain town. Residents move through the streets of the urban center during a clear day. 3 young goblins dressed in matching uniforms march together through the plaza. A small goblin boy sits atop a horse while a horned girl follows. She gazes downward with a sparkling and somber expression under the bright sun. An older goblin skillfully manages the reins of a carriage pulled by horses. The wagon reveals the bound human prisoners sitting dejectedly behind metal bars. Citizens look on with a mix of awe and curiosity as the goblins parade. Human onlookers whisper in amazement about the beautiful girl, wondering if she is a goblin princess. The story flashes back to the previous night as the tribe gathers around a campfire to plan. Akira orders the young artisan to prepare 2 special sets of clothes as quickly as possible. The young goblin ponders a design for Hanzo that will appear both cool and brave to humans. Akira clarifies that the second outfit is for Kuro while the elder craftsman accepts the task. He explains that Kuro needs a delicate and princess-like dress to soften the humans' hearts. The mustachioed goblin confidently vows to create the most extreme and beautiful garment imaginable. Kuro blushes intensely while asking Akira if he personally finds that specific style of dress attractive. Akira assures her that the outfit will look perfect on her, leaving her trembling with excitement. She enthusiastically declares her willingness to wear the dress specifically for his sake. The chief mentions one final instruction as the group prepares for their diplomatic mission. Returning to the present, Kuro sits elegantly behind the young rider as they traverse the town. Suspicious townsfolk watch the procession closely, noticing her horns despite her regal attire. A stone flies through the air toward the group as the town's hostility begins to manifest. An agitated man shouts to the crowd, warning them not to be deceived by the monsters. He accuses the goblins of using their human prisoners to terrorize the innocent citizens. Kuro stares in stunned silence as the hateful labels of filthy monsters are hurled at her. She looks back at the angry faces of the residents who refuse to see her kindness. Akira's name echoes in her mind as she recalls the strict conditions of their current mission. He firmly instructs her to never retaliate even if the humans resort to physical violence. An angry man hurls a stone while shouting for the despicable goblins to leave. The projectile flies through the air toward the mounted group at high speed. Hanzo swiftly reaches out and catches the rock with a single hand. He stares quietly at the caught stone as the surrounding humans freeze in shock. The young goblin looks down with a stoic expression while gripping the projectile. Several townspeople gasp in disbelief at the creature's incredible speed and composure. Kuro shrinks back behind her protector while clutching her dress in fear. Tears stream down her face as she audibly whimpers about being frightened. The crowd immediately turns on the attacker for targeting such a helpless child. Hostile glares turn into friendly waves as the residents bid the cool night farewell. Akira's allies marvel at how quickly the situation improved through his clever planning. Hanzo listens intently while Akira explains the crucial point of the narrative strategy. The chief emphasizes that a believable story is the key to winning human empathy. He illustrates how a knight protecting a princess is a universal tale everyone understands. Elsewhere, a lone guard stands watch outside a large and fortified stone mansion. Inside a dark room, a hand reaches for an official report regarding goblin threats. A weary elderly man sits at his desk while sighing over the difficult news. He ponders the long-lived goblins and the potential ploys they might use against humanity. A final thought lingers in the darkness about preparing a specific response to the threat. Kuro sits alone on a grand bed while looking downcast in her white gown. The group arrives at a heavily fortified gate where guards stand at attention. A sentry maintains his post outside a grand stone building surrounded by blooming bushes. Kuro and her companion walk through a sprawling formal garden with elaborate hedges. The young girl looks around with wide eyes and asks if this is the castle. A welcoming voice calls out from above, catching the attention of the visitors. An elderly man with a towel greets them with a gentle and friendly smile. Akira looks up cheerfully as he expresses his gratitude for the Count's understanding. Meanwhile, a few goblins celebrate their successful work while laughing together nearby. The Count expresses a bit of disappointment over missing the chance to see a cool goblin. His face takes on a more contemplative expression as the conversation turns serious. Kuro remains quiet and composed while the adults discuss her presence at the manor. Akira stands before his friend to explain his long-term strategy and future plans. He offers a firm assurance that the girl poses no threat to any humans. The elderly host nods in agreement and decides to place full trust in Akira. He shifts the topic playfully by leaning in to ask about their daily plans. Kuro tilts her head in confusion as the Count's eccentric interests are mentioned. A sudden noise causes a massive flock of birds to scatter from the trees. The group turns their eyes toward the sky to investigate the unexpected commotion. Kuro's eye glows with magical power as she activates her special clairvoyance ability. She discovers that many of the birds flying overhead have identification tags on their legs. The Count expresses his admiration for Kuro's incredible ability to see far distances. She beams with pride while crediting her unique clairvoyance skill to Akira's influence. The elderly man takes a moment to process this revelation with a thoughtful expression. He points toward the sky and begins to explain the meaning behind the birds. Attendants in the background release more birds while a man carefully documents the flight. Several nightingales soar through the garden before perching themselves on the tree branches. The Count describes a popular high society game known as the Nightingale Bet. He details how participants wager on which bird will land on a specific branch first. The host mentions that he is currently training birds for a widowed acquaintance. Akira quickly surmises that a special reward is promised if the bird wins. A playful and slightly mischievous smirk appears on the elderly man's face. He turns to his friend and challenges him to a practice round of the game. Akira initially declines the offer by reminding the host that he has no birds. A worker prepares a new nightingale for release as the demonstration continues. 2 ornate cages containing the competing birds are set up for the match. The Goblin chief looks over the birds while contemplating the Count's sudden invitation. The Count suggests raising the stakes by adding a personal bet to their game. Akira reacts with pure shock when the terms of the wager are finally revealed. The host explains his desire to have the Goblin tailor design scandalous clothes for ladies. Akira listens to the eccentric request and asks what he stands to gain if he wins. The Count's eyes narrow as he listens intently to the Goblin chief's counter-proposal. Kuro watches the exchange with a mixture of curiosity and growing anticipation. Promising to use his influence to ensure her safety, the elderly man extends a hand. Akira's eye widens behind his specialized lens upon hearing the Lord's serious commitment. A subtle and knowing smile plays across the Count's face as the deal is struck. Accepting the high-stakes challenge, the chief approaches the 2 birdcages placed on the table. He adjusts his glasses to peer closely at the small nightingales trapped within the wire mesh. Although he feels there is little difference between the 2, he carefully weighs his options. Pointing a finger at the top cage, Akira confidently selects his avian champion for the round. An attendant gathers the cages and walks toward a clear path within the lush estate. The host explains that the birds require space from people to fly naturally toward the trees. With a grand gesture, the worker releases both nightingales into the open sky simultaneously. The 2 small birds race through the air, heading straight for the target branch. One nightingale banks toward the wood as if it is about to secure the win. However, the bird suddenly jerks backward mid-air and misses its intended perching spot. Akira lets out a gasp of confusion as his chosen bird fails to land properly. A close-up reveals a hand subtly manipulating a thin, nearly invisible thread during the flight. Kuro immediately spots the transparent string tied to the creature's leg that sabotaged its progress. A look of cold realization settles on the goblin's face as he uncovers the hidden deception. The young attendant turns toward the Count to demand an explanation for his blatant cheating. Akira's eyes widen with a start as he processes the harsh reality of the situation. Kuro feels a sudden wave of dizziness as she tries to comprehend the gamble's outcome. The small bird finally perches on the branch, the sabotaging thread still visible on its leg. The Count lets out a hearty laugh of victory while Akira graciously accepts his defeat. Watching the exchange carefully, Kuro remains silent as the goblin chief prepares for his next move. The scene shifts to a lavishly decorated room filled with mirrors and intricate gold trim. A steady hand moves a quill across parchment, scratching out a formal letter in the silence. The elderly lord pauses his writing, looking down at his work with a deeply contemplative expression. A sudden knock echoes against the tall, ornate double doors leading into the private study. The female knight enters the room and asks if she was called for by the Count. Standing at attention, she waits for the lord to finish his task at the desk. He carefully places the written message onto a flat surface to prepare it for delivery. Molten wax drips onto the envelopes seem to create a secure and official seal. Karen looks at the letter with curiosity, wondering about the purpose of such a formal document. Holding the sealed reply aloft, the Count reveals it contains his assessment of the goblin's threat. She leans in slightly, asking for more details regarding the nature of his official response. The Lord reflects on the rigged bird race, explaining how the gamble was a calculated test. He notes that the goblin's submissive reaction proves he is currently not a significant danger. The knight lets out a quiet sigh of understanding as she absorbs the Count's strategic reasoning. Pushing an ornate wooden box across the table, the Count presents a special gift to Karen. Karen curiously examines the ornate gift box, wondering about its mysterious contents. The Count's expression darkens as he identifies the object as a specialized goblin slayer weapon. He explains that it is a secret countermeasure designed for goblins with multiple high-level skills. Karen looks at the Lord with confusion, questioning why such a powerful tool is being entrusted to her. Reflecting on the recent race, the Count notes how the goblin chief saw through his deceptive trap. The knight listens intently as her lord describes the chief's refusal to fall for any bait. Turning his attention to Kuro, the Count warns that the goblin deviates too far from his kind. The lid of the box remains open to reveal a beautifully crafted and deadly dagger. The lord insists that the weapon be kept close for use during a potential emergency. Karen acknowledges the grave responsibility with a serious nod and a quiet verbal confirmation. The legendary blade glows with an ominous aura as its purpose as a goblin-killing tool is emphasized. Historical context reveals how humans relied on their wit to survive against physically superior races. These survival instincts led to the invention of a powerful set of specialized slayer weapons. Magic circles hum around the metal, showing how infused energy creates a lethal effect on targets. The narrative demonstrates how even a minor graze from the weapon results in instantaneous death. Chronicled history specifies that only 3 distinct types of these slayers were ever manufactured. The first is the Dragon Slayer, a weapon capable of felling the mightiest winged beasts. The second is the Demon Slayer, forged specifically to combat the chaotic forces of hell. Kuro looks over the third and final creation, the Goblin Slayer, resting in its case. She stands before a pile of defeated foes, contemplating the terrifying potential of the goblin race. Kuro observes the intruders with a piercing gaze, sensing the impending conflict. The forest remains deceptively calm as sunlight filters through the dense canopy above. She gestures for the trespassers to depart, claiming the village as her people's territory. The lead knight retorts with insults, refusing to acknowledge a monster's right to live. Tension thickens as they face off in a small clearing surrounded by ancient trees. Karen stands aside and watches the scene unfold with a stoic and neutral expression. The knight draws his sword with a flourish, declaring his intent to deliver punishment. He lunges forward and brings his heavy blade down toward the small goblin. Kuro counters the assault by igniting the concentrated power of the black blaze. A brief reflection explains how she refined her innate abilities to master this skill. Waves of dark fire surge outward, creating a wall of heat and shadow. Bewildered by the sudden magical display, the knight struggles to find his target. The goblin darts through the smoke, utilizing her small stature to evade the blade. Multiple flares of black energy erupt around the knight, cutting off his escape. He gasps in shock, realizing too late the true strength of his opponent. The searing dark flames completely engulf the warrior in a violent pillar of fire. Kuro stands back and silently observes the devastation she has unleashed. She looks on with a chilling smile, directing the heat to consume her foe. The knight stumbles and falls to his knees, his armor smoking from the intensity. He finally slumps forward and hits the ground, silenced by the overwhelming attack. Kuro stands over the charred, fallen knight and jokes about holding back her true power. She briefly reflects on her past life and her childhood fascination with dark magic. The smoke-stained warrior stumbles before her, struggling to maintain his composure after the heat. Sensing his unwavering and dangerous sense of justice, she decides he cannot be simply released. Her expression shifts into a cold focus as she invokes the law of the jungle. The knight recoils in visible shock as a sudden mental pressure weighs upon his spirit. Reaching out with a glowing hand, she strictly forbids him from ever attacking goblins again. Completely drained of his previous arrogance, the warrior obediently echoes the command she gave. Kuro justifies the use of this mental strike as a necessary means for self-protection. Karen watches the scene from the shadows, her face turning pale at the display. A dark, demonic figure flashes through her thoughts as she recalls the origin of such power. Her hands tremble while she grips her sword hilt, questioning the reality of what she sees. The defeated man continues his humble submission, his will crushed by the goblin's superior magic. His eyes widen in total surrender as his core beliefs are rewritten in an instant. The terrifying effectiveness of the skill ensures absolute obedience from any enemy who has lost. Karen begins to doubt if even a legendary slayer can handle such an overwhelming threat. She stares at the shadowed goblin and wonders if her own spirit will eventually change. The knight finally retreats into the dense woods, exhaling a heavy sigh of lingering fear. Kuro turns back to her companion and casually asks what is causing her such distress. She points out Karen's ghostly complexion and wonders why she looks so remarkably pale. Kuro looks up in sudden surprise as she listens to her friend's question. Karen asks with a hint of trepidation if the goblin chief's power has grown, manifesting a dark flame. Kuro explains she has inherited a new fused skill. She confirms that such abilities are passed through their lineage as Karen watches. The reality of this evolution causes a bead of sweat to roll down Karen's cheek. Kuro notes that all members of her tribe will continue to gain strength. She envisions a future where even the lowliest goblins serve as secret weapons. A confident smirk plays on her lips as she predicts the end of slayers. The chief suggests returning to the village while Karen silently resolves to take action. The warrior follows behind in the dim light, confirming she is right there. Night settles over the goblin camp and the small dome-like dwellings within. Deep inside her study, Kuro sits peacefully reading by the light of a lantern. An unexpected knock at the door prompts her to invite the visitor inside. The heavy wooden entrance swings open to reveal someone entering from the hall. Karen stands in the doorway with her features partially obscured by deep shadows. Remaining at her desk, Kuro waits for the warrior. She eventually turns her head to check on the woman, but the goblin is stunned to see Karen standing there in a simple bikini. The warrior meets her gaze with an expression of intense and somber determination. Kuro reacts with a frantic shout, demanding to know what her companion is doing. Karen exhales a deep breath, steeling herself as she stands in the doorway. Kuro stammers in shock, her face breaking into a cold sweat at the sight. Without warning, the warrior lunges forward and pins the goblin against the desk. The force of the movement causes the lantern to shake and clatter against the wall. Pinned against the scattered papers, Kuro stares up in wide-eyed bewilderment. Karen looms over her with a somber and focused intensity in her eyes. The goblin's mind briefly drifts into a romantic fantasy before she refocuses on the crisis. A droplet of sweat or a tear falls from the warrior's face onto Kuro's lens. Karen's face is completely flushed as she holds her position over the chief. Stunned into silence, Kuro can only watch as her friend remains motionless. Everything seems to spin for the goblin chief as she tries to regain her composure. She quickly grabs a decorative rug and drapes it over Karen's exposed shoulders. The warrior huddles under the cloth while Kuro demands to know the reason for this. Karen remains quiet, her gaze drifting downward as she reflects on her impulsive actions. Kuro wonders what motivated the sudden tackle but chooses to keep the thought internal. She flatly states that attempts at human seduction are ineffective against her species. To illustrate her point, she mentions the platonic beauty of other tribe members. The chief confidently explains that pure-blooded goblins do not experience lust for humans. Karen absorbs this information with a blank and somewhat disappointed look. Apologizing for her behavior, the warrior turns and sprints out of the study. The door slams shut behind Karen as she makes her hasty exit from the study. Kuro wipes sweat from her brow, feeling relieved that her lie about goblin biology worked. Despite her success, a sense of guilt lingers for deceiving her companion so thoroughly. The image of Karen's seductive attempt remains burned into the goblin's memory. She hunches over in private shame, cursing her own libido for actually finding the display attractive. Settling back into her chair, Kuro stares blankly as she processes the strange encounter. She deliberately pushes away any thoughts regarding Karen's true, underlying motivations. Meanwhile, the warrior's feet pound against the dirt as she sprints through the village. She dashes past several goblin children who are distracted by their midday snacks. The young tribe members watch her pass in confusion and wonder what caused such a rush. Heavy gasps echo through the dense forest as the fugitive reaches the outskirts. Karen finally collapses against a tree trunk, clutching the decorative rug tightly around herself. A sudden voice calling her name causes the warrior to jump in startled surprise. A small goblin herb gatherer approaches and questions why she is out there without clothes. The child beams with innocent kindness, promising to get the local tailor to make her something new. He tells her to wait there before running back toward the village for help. Left alone again, Karen muses on how the goblins truly seem indifferent to her appearance. She recalls the Count's instructions, realizing his claims about goblin weaknesses were entirely false. Shame washes over her for blindly following such foolish advice without question. Staring at her weapon, she finally admits to herself that she cannot bring herself to kill Akira. Karen stands alone in the woods, wondering what her next move should be. A mysterious voice suddenly rings out, claiming that they will handle her situation. She spins around in a panic, clutching her makeshift wrap as a threat emerges. The dark, tangled branches of the forest canopy loom over the empty path. Akira and a young goblin scout rush through the trees toward the clearing. They find the patterned rug lying abandoned on the grass with Karen missing. The young herb gatherer explains that the warrior vanished the moment he looked away. Akira senses a hidden presence and realizes they are no longer alone. He lunges forward to shove the young goblin out of the line of fire. The boy stands confused in the brush, unaware of the danger lurking nearby. Akira recognizes that the child is not a warrior and cannot defend himself. He moves to shield the boy as a powerful aura begins to radiate. Letting out a fierce roar, the goblin chief channels his mana into a spell. A massive wall of black fire erupts from the earth to repel the attacker. The dark flames consume the area as the goblins are thrown back by the force. Akira decides to clear the surroundings entirely since the enemy remains hidden. Both goblins tumble onto the dirt from the recoil of the massive explosion. Quickly recovering, Akira orders the boy to flee back to the safety of the village. The young gatherer sprints away as the chief prepares for a solo confrontation. Eerie silence falls over the woods as the shadows continue to shift through the trees. Akira stands in the clearing and demands the hidden assassin reveal themselves while sensing a lingering deathly aura. A subtle rustle sounds from the dense thicket as the enemy prepares their next move. The goblin chief remains on high alert and considers the tactical possibilities of the situation. Suddenly a blinding flash of light bursts across the forest floor. On a high rocky ledge, a cloaked figure emerges holding Karen's unconscious body over their shoulder. Akira gazes upward in horror upon seeing his companion in the hands of the intruder. The mysterious hooded figure shifts their grip and prepares to discard the warrior. Karen is dropped from the height as Akira lunges forward to prevent her from hitting the ground. He successfully catches her but immediately begins to panic about her condition. Noticing the strange weight and texture of her body, the chief looks down in confusion. The hooded assassin materializes instantly and gloats about trapping the goblin. A jagged blade is plunged deep into Akira's torso before he can react. He gags and spits out a spray of dark blood from the impact of the steel. Droplets of gore splash onto Karen's face as her body rests against him. Gasping for breath, the goblin stares at the wound while his vision begins to blur. A cruel smirk forms on the visible portion of the assassin's mouth under the hood. Akira collapses onto his knees while a massive spray of blood coats the background. The killer stands triumphantly over the pair while the real Akira observes from a high tree limb. The stabbed figure begins to dissolve into a cloud of smoke as the shadow clone skill activates. Safely perched above the carnage, Akira realizes the assassin has been using the exact same deceptive tricks. The hooded assassin recoils in shock as the figure they stabbed dissolves into thin air. Suddenly a massive stone pillar from a rock grave spell crashes down toward the bewildered killer. The enemy flees and leaves only an ornate sword behind on the forest floor. The abandoned weapon glimmers with an intricate design on its hilt while lying in the dirt. Akira cautiously approaches the blade and questions the nature of such a peculiar artifact. A sudden realization flashes across his face as he detects a terrifying power within the steel. He tentatively reaches out toward a nearby branch while maintaining his distance from the weapon. An overwhelming aura of impending death surges from the blade and chills the goblin chief. He identifies the cursed object as the legendary goblin slayer while sweat beads on his forehead. Karen eventually emerges from the shadows of the woods looking weary and battered from the ordeal. Her face is marked with grime and exhaustion as she stares blankly ahead after the struggle. The scene transitions to a memory of Karen tending to a group of playful goblin infants. Shortly after, the focus shifts to a cluster of domed dwellings nestled deep within the forest. A wooden mug filled with a steaming hot beverage sits quietly upon a rough-hewn table. Akira offers Karen a set of simple garments inside the hut and apologizes for their quality. She accepts the hospitality and takes a slow sip from the warm wooden cup. The warrior looks up with a soft expression and offers her sincere thanks to the chief. Both of them sit in silence as the mysterious sword rests on the table between them. Akira focuses intensely on the blade while contemplating the lethal implications of such a tool. Karen explains that the weapon is designed to instantly kill any goblin that touches it. Akira trembles at the memory of the lethal aura radiating from the cursed blade. He then asks Karen if Simone truly perceives him as a genuine threat. Karen pauses with a serious look and realizes he has already deduced the truth. The goblin chief laughs off the tension while acknowledging the statesman's cunning nature. Karen watches him closely and wonders if he harbors any resentment over the trap. He responds calmly by stating that a leader must be cautious with unpredictable factors. The conversation turns toward the sword as they discuss the Count's indirect methods. A grim vision of the past army that once marched on the village resurfaces. Karen reflects on the situation and concedes that his observation is correct. She notes how the Count often hides his true intentions behind reports and countermeasures. Akira remains focused on the details of the political maneuvering being described. They agree that the attempt to capture a monster using such irregular means is suspicious. The scene shifts to the imposing stone facade of the Count's massive estate at night. Inside the manor, candles flicker against the ornate frames of expensive paintings. The Count exhales a long sigh of relief while sitting alone in his study. He looks up with a sharp gaze and acknowledges the failure of the assassination. Karen and Akira eventually enter the room to face the nobleman directly. She bows her head and admits that even seduction was ineffective against the chief. The Count listens quietly to the report while maintaining his composure in the chair. Akira stands his ground and demands to know the reason for being summoned. Akira begins the interrogation by stating he came for the Count's side of the story. The nobleman responds with a simple expression of mild curiosity. The goblin chief presses further regarding the Count's decision to avoid direct confrontation. A heavy silence fills the room as the elder nobleman remains pensively quiet. Akira stares back with an intense gaze while waiting for a genuine explanation. The Count finally breaks his silence to lecture on the history of the goblin race. He explains that goblins possess a remarkable ability to adapt to any environment. A diagram depicts how different biomes trigger specific resistances within the species. The lecture details how rapid evolution occurs over just a few generations. Akira acknowledges the concept by relating it to the known theory of evolution. The nobleman reveals that goblins nearly vanished from the world 50 years ago. Karen listens in disbelief as he recounts the mass culling by humans. The Count poses a question about the consequences of that near-total eradication. The goblin chief deduces that survival instincts must have forced a drastic evolution. The nobleman confirms his theory with a solemn nod and a steady gaze. A visual representation highlights the desperate state of the last surviving member. The elder explains that the final goblin developed a skill with 3 unique effects. He describes how that last survivor gained the ability to never truly die. Akira realizes the sheer weight of a species evolving purely for survival. The Count raises a finger to define asexual reproduction as the second survival effect. A diagram illustrates how the last survivor birthed hundreds of offspring at the cost of its life, leading Karen to realize this single goblin is the ancestor of all currently living ones. The nobleman then prepares to reveal the third and most dangerous survival skill. He pauses momentarily with a grim expression to let the gravity of the history sink in. Akira watches intently while awaiting the final detail of this ancient evolutionary legacy. An image depicts the ancient goblin wielding every single skill possessed by its entire species. Both Akira and Karen exhibit sheer astonishment at the potential for such overwhelming power. The Count explains that this multi-skilled entity once slaughtered thousands of human warriors. He admits that these fading historical memories justify his extreme caution toward modern goblins. Akira deduces that the Count avoided attacking the village to prevent a new catastrophic evolution. The nobleman confirms this tactical choice while distinguishing between ordinary and special threats. A heavy quiet settles over the room as the group ponders the implications of the past. The elder remains stoic while reflecting on his personal philosophy regarding failure and growth. Akira recalls the Count's earlier words about judging a person by their past mistakes. The conversation turns toward the risk of accidentally creating a new kind of monster. The Goblin chief nods in agreement with the nobleman's cautious and calculated logic. The Count finds it strange that his visitor remains so carefree despite the danger. Karen interjects to tell the Count he has misinterpreted the Goblin chief's perspective. Akira clarifies that he does not view a mistake as an ultimate dead end. He concludes that learning from failures is a direct and necessary path toward ultimate success. The nobleman begins to chuckle softly as he processes Akira's bold statement, suddenly erupting into a loud and boisterous laugh that catches the entire room off guard, eventually settling back down while admitting that the goblin's reasoning is entirely sound. Akira looks on with a bewildered expression at being lectured on human logic by a monster. A genuine smile forms on the Count's face as he openly expresses his deep impression. The Goblin chief turns away in embarrassment as he receives such unexpected and high praise. Leaning heavily against the table, the Count asks for a solution to their immediate predicament. Standing with unwavering confidence, Akira explains that the answer to their problem is quite simple. Raising a hand to make a point, he begins to elaborate on his grand strategy. He asserts that his individual value must ultimately outweigh the threat he is perceived to be. Akira confirms this core philosophy with a firm nod while the others listen in silence. He bluntly reminds the Count that the previous assassination attempt was born from fear. The nobleman closes his eyes while acknowledging that he has developed a personal sense of trust. Karen remains quiet and observant as she watches the two leaders reach a mutual understanding. She interjects by asking the Count how he can justify trusting someone he previously found suspicious. Standing with arms folded, the Count prepares to offer a cryptic explanation for his change of heart. A series of internal flashes suggest a hidden reason that the men refuse to disclose. He brushes off the inquiry by claiming it is simply a secret shared between men. Looking away, the Count notes that other aristocrats will likely not be as understanding as himself. He then turns his attention to Simone to confirm a crucial detail regarding their next move. Akira questions whether influential people in this world also seek the secret of immortality. The Count confirms his belief while the Goblin contemplates the nature of human desire. Various historical and mythical figures illustrate the universal search for immortality across different dimensions. Narrowing his eyes, the nobleman asks if Akira intends to spread a scam about living forever. Akira immediately dismisses the accusation with a cheerful and innocent look on his face. A stream of liquid flows into a goblet, symbolizing the clouding of a ruler's judgment. He declares that he has no intention of repeating such a dishonorable mistake again. The Count appears skeptical and questions why the Goblin even brought up the subject. Clenching his small fist, Akira emphasizes the core motivation behind every ruler's ambition. He explains that those at the top desire to reach the ultimate summit of existence. Suggesting a hypothetical scenario, Akira looks around the room to prepare for a demonstration. A tiny bird chirps innocently from within its metal cage on the table. Akira reaches for the cage door while his companions watch his movements with curiosity. The nobleman wonders aloud what the Goblin plans to achieve with his current line of reasoning. Gently holding the creature on his hand, Akira maintains a calm and steady focus. He softly apologizes to the small bird right before initiating a sudden and violent act. A sharp ice needle manifests and strikes the bird's wing with brutal and calculated precision. The knight cries out in shock as she witnesses the sudden injury to the animal. Akira instantly channels a massive surge of healing magic to mend the bird's shattered wing. The bird takes flight once more as the witnesses stand paralyzed by the display of power. Akira names the powerful ability Great Heal while watching the bird ascend. He explains that the magic can mend any injury as long as the victim still lives. The knight asks if this is another fused skill and receives a confident confirmation. The bird soars gracefully overhead as the onlookers marvel at the display of miraculous power. The nobleman notes that standard healing spells lack the strength to fix a punctured heart. Akira retorts that his advanced technique is more than capable of such a feat. Suddenly the bird retaliates for its earlier treatment by dropping a mess on the Goblin's head. As Akira wipes his brow, the knight dryly tells him to accept the animal's natural response. The Count bursts into a fit of thunderous laughter at the absurd turn of events. Akira and his companion watch the man with wide eyes, wondering what caused his outburst. Stroking his chin, the noble acknowledges that the skill is an asset of immeasurable worth. The small goblin grins with pride and seeks further agreement from his high-ranking hosts. He explains that becoming an indispensable lifeline is the key to their future alliance. A brief flash of his past life illustrates the unexpected dangers that can strike anyone. The noble agrees that a healer of this caliber is a far greater asset than a threat. Slapping his knee with conviction, the Count announces his full support for the Goblin's cause. He leans back confidently and promises to handle the political maneuvers on their behalf. With a bright expression, Akira expresses his gratitude for the nobleman's sudden change of heart. He pauses for a moment as if suddenly recalling another important matter to discuss. Akira insists on showing his appreciation, while the Count dismisses the need for formality between friends. Akira promises to send a goblin healer whenever the Count requires such specialized assistance, leaning in to whisper that the skill even restores vigor to the lower body. The Count bellows with laughter while slapping his new friend's back in delight. Karen stands by quietly as the bird takes flight from the nearby table. The small creature soars through the air with its wings fully mended. After the goblin leaves the room, the Count and Karen remain in a heavy silence. Turning toward his knight, the nobleman offers a sincere apology for the earlier events. He looks down with regret and insists he never meant to cause her any pain. Karen dismisses the concern by blaming her own lack of skill for the injury. Her gaze softens as she prepares to voice a deeper concern about the future. She questions whether the Count truly intends to follow through with the goblin's proposal. A knowing smile touches the noble's face as he considers the nature of their guest. Akira wanders through the vibrant rose garden with a posture that seems remarkably human. The Count reflects on how their ally blends monstrous power with human wisdom and longevity. Karen listens in focused silence as her master continues his evaluation of the situation. He admits that while fear creates threats, the potential for a powerful partnership is undeniable. With a look of peaceful resolution, he declares his intent to trust the goblin's vision. Karen offers a bright smile and confirms her absolute loyalty to her master's choice. Several days pass as the political landscape of the estate begins to shift. Akira strolls through the manicured hedges and calls out to Simone about their pending business. Akira expresses disbelief, wondering if the recent negotiations hit an unexpected snag. Simone reassures him that his reputation is actually growing and suggests he simply needs a public demonstration. The goblin hesitates while considering the implications of such a high-profile performance. Noting the tension, the elderly nobleman asks his friend what is truly bothering him. A tall stranger interrupts the private garden meeting by announcing his intent to lead the discussion. A youthful man with elegant, ruffled attire and a confident gaze steps into view. He greets the small goblin with a smile, acknowledging the rumors he has heard. Without warning, the newcomer reaches down and firmly seizes Akira's hand. He begins a vigorous and enthusiastic handshake that leaves the small village chief completely dazed. Once released, the confused goblin turns to Simone to ask for the stranger's identity. Simone formally introduces the man as Albert South Windsor, the kingdom's third prince. Akira reacts with pure shock at the sudden appearance of high royalty in the garden. The prince radiates a dazzling, almost overwhelming aristocratic aura as he stands there. The elderly noble prepares to provide further context regarding the royal guest's formidable background. Prince Albert maintains a composed posture while his legendary status is discussed. Simone reveals that this very man was responsible for the total defeat of the Demon Lord. The goblin's eyes widen in terror and amazement at the revelation of such power. The small village chief looks upward with a contemplative expression as the situation develops. Prince Albert stands with his hand on his hip while exuding a powerful, charismatic presence. Akira remains completely speechless after hearing about the stranger's victory over the Demon Lord. Akira eyes the extravagant third prince, silently noting his flashy and over-the-top aristocratic presence. The goblin village chief begins to question how the royal guest possesses such specific information. Albert reveals with a confident smirk that his unique skill is known as Shikoten Haki. Akira repeats the name of the mysterious technique while trying to decipher its hidden meaning. He theorizes that the prince must have nullified the demon lord's most lethal and absolute laws. The prince observes the small goblin's sharp intuition, remarking on how cunning the chief truly is. Albert steps forward to ask if Akira has already deduced the exact mechanics of his power. The royal guest leans in slightly and mentions a strange concept involving a temporal rewind. A sudden and intense rumble resonates through the garden as the conversation takes a sharp turn. Standing amidst a radiant and sparkling aura, the prince maintains his impeccable and charming composure. A nervous sweat breaks out on Akira's face as he discusses the terrifying nature of his former foe. The chief again marvels at the prince's flamboyant appearance while they stand in the sunlit garden. Akira presses the royal for more details on how his incredible feat was actually accomplished. The prince playfully puts a finger to his lips, declaring the information to be a trade secret. Laughing off the rejection, the goblin chief admits that he expected such a secretive response. Prince Albert lowers his gaze while contemplating the goblin's connection to the fallen demon lord. The trio stands together among the manicured hedges as the prince asks about their final confrontation. Akira realizes that the royal hasn't actually explained the method he used to claim victory. He boldly suggests that Albert possesses an ability specifically designed to cancel out the jungle's law. The prince stands silent and momentarily stunned by the small goblin's incredibly accurate and dangerous deduction. Akira looks up in disbelief, questioning if he successfully guessed the truth behind the prince's hidden power. The prince's lips curl into a satisfied smile as he acknowledges the goblin's impressive and cunning nature. Standing amidst the garden hedges, Albert notes that having a sharp-witted listener makes his task much easier. The view shifts to the grand architecture of the estate, while the royal guest mentions his formal request. Albert explains that his primary mission was to meet the person who inherited the demon lord's unique skill. Akira stares ahead in silent contemplation, finally understanding the deeper meaning behind the prince's sudden appearance. Simone watches the exchange with a narrowed gaze, keeping his own thoughts about the situation well guarded. Diverse thoughts and past encounters flicker through the air as the group reflects on their odd circumstances. Entering the manor, a magnificent chandelier hangs from the ceiling and fills the hall with sparkling light. The focus shifts to the elegant patterns of the interior design and the polished atmosphere of the room. The party gathers around a low table while a maid arrives to pour fresh tea for the guests. Sparkling sweets and finely crafted chocolates are laid out on a decorative plate alongside the tea service. Albert sips from his cup with such refined poise that a shimmering aura seems to surround him. Akira watches in total awe, noting that even the simple act of drinking tea exudes peak aristocratic elegance. Sitting together, the prince clarifies his royal connections by explaining that his father is the emperor's uncle. A wave of realization hits Akira as he remembers Karen's initial introduction of the elderly man named Simone. Simone sighs while mentioning his long history of caring for Albert since the prince was just a baby. The goblin chief's eyes widen with intense curiosity upon hearing about a supposed major flaw in Albert. Gesturing casually, Simone explains that the prince's extreme devotion to his fiancée is his primary weakness. The elder man expresses his frustration regarding the prince's limited romantic experience while considering the future of the country. Akira laughs while commenting on the prince's steadfast nature and his unusual lack of interest in women. Eating a snack, Albert remarks that his granduncle's trust is misplaced when dealing with a creature like a goblin. The conversation takes an awkward turn as Akira nervously considers the intense reproductive capabilities of his species. A mental image of a crowded, heart-adorned dome illustrates the sheer popularity of certain goblins back at the village. Akira blushes as he acknowledges that his current impulses far exceed anything he experienced during his human life. Returning to the present, Albert sips his tea while explaining his motive for visiting the goblin chief in person. Setting down his spoon, the prince brings up the miraculous healing power Akira displayed during their last encounter. With a sharp and calculating gaze, Albert questions if Akira intends to offer such rare magic without asking for payment. Akira looks down in deep thought, admitting that he had not fully considered the implications of his altruistic actions. The prince smiles knowingly, confirming that the topic of proper compensation was exactly what he wanted to discuss. Sitting across the table, Albert advises the goblin to demand an extravagant reward for his specialized services. Akira ponders the suggestion, realizing that his approach to diplomacy needs a more business-oriented edge. Albert further explains that a demon who asks for nothing only invites more suspicion from the wary humans. A vision of gold bars and royal crowns flickers in Akira's mind as he weighs the benefits of accumulating wealth. The goblin chief concludes that he will charge the nobility while providing free care to the common villagers. Albert smiles with genuine approval, noting that such a balanced strategy would be the most effective path forward. Simone watches the interaction from the sidelines, silently noting the rapport developing between the prince and the goblin. The view shifts toward the open sky where white clouds drift slowly above the surrounding forest trees. Standing by the window, Albert folds his arms and stares out at the horizon with a contemplative expression. Simone breaks the silence by asking the prince for his final impression of the goblin after meeting him in person. Simone admits with a slight smirk that she might be no match for the goblin. The granduncle notes that the anticipation of a reward is a purely human instinct. Albert acknowledges that even the most flawless plans only have a 50-50 chance of success. Leaning back, the old man laughs loudly at the idea of the goblin being obedient. The prince observes from the window that docile opponents often end up on the losing side. He thoughtfully considers if sacrificing his own life would even be enough for their cause. Looking downward, the granduncle expresses his deep desire to avoid a turn for the worse. Albert turns around to question if his relative truly places his trust in a monster. The elderly man confirms his stance with a simple and confident affirmation. A determined look crosses the prince's face as he remains silent for a long moment. Standing tall by the window, Albert waits before delivering his next thought. He catches the granduncle's attention by stating that he has only one proposal to make. Akira is seen in a brief flashback discussing the welfare of his goblin tribe. The prince boldly suggests that they should help Akira become the next demon lord. Granduncle reacts with genuine surprise as he looks back at the young man. Meanwhile, a young demon girl stretches outdoors while her small companions gather around. The morning light filters through the dense canopy of the surrounding ancient forest. Akira walks alone through the tall grass, making his way toward his next destination. The goblin chief adjusts his gaze behind his glasses while pondering his interactions with royalty. Albert realizes that understanding the power that threatened the previous demon lord is essential. Simone warns that some secrets should be treated as traps to avoid past mistakes. Akira decides it is safer to withhold his special ability against a legendary fighter. Wandering through the woods, Kuro stops in her tracks as she senses something unusual. The young demon girl looks around with an expression of mild confusion and curiosity. Akira approaches her from the trail and inquires about her presence in the forest. She explains that a familiar and nostalgic presence drew her to this specific location. Looking slightly puzzled, the goblin chief tries to process the meaning of her words. He scans the surrounding trees in an attempt to spot any hidden or invisible onlookers. The thick branches and dense foliage provide no immediate clues to the mysterious feeling. Despite her intuition, Kuro admits that she does not see anyone else in the area. A close-up of her focused eye highlights her intense concentration on the mystery. Akira suddenly reaches for a branch to ask his companion a very specific question. Holding up the wooden stick, he readies himself to perform a quick ground sketch. He carefully etches a portrait into the soft soil while the girl watches intently. The finished drawing reveals the face of the prince who challenged the previous demon lord. Amazed by his artistic talent, Kuro listens as he asks if she recognizes him. She studies the dirt image for a moment before confirming she does not know him. Satisfied with her response, Akira begins to sweep away the drawing with his foot. A massive shadowy silhouette represents the powerful threat that Albert once fought to a standstill. Kuro leaps through the air as Akira realizes that her lack of a grudge is beneficial. Akira looks at Kuro while pondering the true nature of Albert's ability. Dismissively, he shakes his head and tells her that everything is fine. Internalizing his theories, he considers why the demon girl failed to recognize the hero. Silence falls between the two as they stand within the quiet woods. Suddenly, Kuro reacts with a look of pure shock to an unseen stimulus. She sprints away into the thicket, leaving Akira to call after her. The girl shouts her confirmation that someone has indeed been lurking nearby. She navigates the terrain at high speeds to confront the intruders. Bursting through the clearing, she finds a group of men surrounding a body. The startled humans yell for her to stop as she approaches. Without hesitation, she launches a powerful kick that sends a man reeling. The bandits grow terrified as they realize a demon has attacked them. Baring her fangs, she expresses her disgust for their insolent behavior. She leaps high into the air to strike down the strongest among them. One of the adversaries grunts in pain as he takes a heavy blow. Akira watches the unfolding battle from the edge of the forest clearing. The man scoffs and assumes she has come to rescue the captives. Walking closer, Akira tells the man to end the charade regarding the hostages. The enraged human raises his blade to crush the small goblin chief. Akira ignites a black blaze in his hand to end the fight instantly. A massive column of black flames erupts in the middle of the forest clearing. Kuro and the bandits look on in total shock at the sudden display of power. Akira's foot firmly plants itself on the ground as he declares the end of the conflict. The bandits tremble and realize that the small goblin is the legendary figure from the rumors. Akira stands composed while the swirling dark energy looms behind him like a mountain. A close-up shows Akira's intense eyes through his glasses as he is identified as a goblin lord. He sighs inwardly at his new title but decides to use the reputation to his advantage. The terrified men stand frozen with their weapons drawn while Akira approaches them calmly. Akira gestures toward the three people lying on the ground and demands a justification for the abduction. One of the bandits yells back defiantly, refusing to explain himself to a mere goblin. Several shadow clones of Akira manifest around the group, trapping them in place. Peering directly at the leader, Akira repeats his question with a cold and demanding stare. The bandits realize they are completely outmatched and begin to panic under the pressure. Seeing no other choice, the leader orders his men to fall back and retreat immediately. The group of humans flees into the dense forest, leaving their captives behind. Kuro beams with joy and praises Akira for his incredible performance in the confrontation. Akira's sweat drops as he admits the massive flames were mostly just for intimidation purposes. He turns his attention back to the 3 unconscious figures lying beneath a tree. He wonders aloud why these specific individuals were targeted by the group of bandits. Kuro watches the scene with a serious expression, pondering the mystery of the attack. A demon girl looks away somberly while identifying the captives as her own allies. Standing tall in her white dress, she gazes down at a completely bewildered Akira. The girl kneels on the forest floor to tend to the 3 hooded figures. Akira's eye widens in sudden shock as he recognizes something about the situation. A gentle hand reaches out to touch the hair of one of the unconscious women. The 3 elves named Irene, Dike, and Yunomiya are revealed lying motionless together. With a serious expression, the demon girl confirms that they are all under her protection. Akira begins to sweat as he wonders if these women serve the demon lord's army. A comparison is drawn between a tall knight named Mino and the small goblin chief. A decorated fox mascot rests quietly near the text for the group's social links. The rescued elf women are moved to a room where they rest under white sheets. Leaning forward with concern, the demon girl asks if her friends will be okay. Akira explains that he has already used his high-level magic to heal their wounds. The party gathers inside the stone room to discuss the extreme exhaustion of the captives. A close-up shows Yunomiya sleeping peacefully while she slowly recovers her strength. The group debates their next move while looking over the 3 recovering patients. Akira and the demon girl step out onto a ledge overlooking several domed buildings. Calling out into the village, Akira shouts for a goblin named Masamune to appear. They look down at the bustling goblin settlement where various workers are gathered. A cheerful goblin girl named Masamune IV runs up to greet the chief. A variety of traditional Japanese dishes are showcased as the history behind Masamune's name is explained. Akira requests nutritious, easy-to-eat meals for the recovering patients from a cheerful, thumb-upping cook. The demon girl clenches her fists and loudly proclaims that she will also help with the task. The trio descends a set of stone stairs nestled between the domed houses of the village. Akira walks alone through the settlement, reflecting on how precious these allies must be to the girl. A sudden sound catches Akira's attention, causing his eyes to widen in complete surprise. A pair of bare feet step cautiously across the wooden threshold of a doorway. One of the rescued elf women stands in the entrance, looking exhausted while wrapped in white bandages. The quiet village atmosphere is captured by the sight of domed rooftops and a distant windmill. Looking up at the woman, Akira asks with concern if she is already well enough to stand. The elf woman bows her head deeply, offering her sincere thanks for the group's life-saving intervention. Waving his hands in a frantic dismissive gesture, Akira asks for the name of the middle sister. With a gentle expression, the woman identifies herself as Dike and explains her family position. Akira introduces himself while Dike sits back on her bed alongside her still sleeping companions. Visibly flustered by her politeness, the goblin chief insists that such formal language is unnecessary. Dike watches him closely, noting that his leadership mirrors the footsteps of the former demon lord. Akira nervously admits to inheriting some skills while clarifying that he is not the next ruler. The conversation turns toward the group's well-being as Akira asks about the hardships of their long journey. A grim recollection shows the demon girl in rags and humans launching violent assaults against them. Dike lowers her gaze and closes her eyes as she prepares to recount their painful history. Dike attributes her sister's worsening state to the mysterious disappearance of their former lord. Looking utterly perplexed, Akira questions her about the connection to the late demon lord. A solemn silence falls over the room as Dike prepares to make a desperate plea. She suddenly drops to the floor in a deep bow, begging for Akira's assistance. With tears streaming down her face, she implores him to grant her sister's orders to live. Akira stands frozen in shock, repeating the strange request while trying to comprehend its weight. The flickering light of a nearby lantern casts long shadows across the walls of the hut. Dike reveals that the immortal nature of elves often causes their will to survive to fade. Akira listens intently as she explains that food is vital, yet her sisters refuse to eat. A vision of the sisters appears, showing their total lack of interest in sustaining themselves. Horrified, Akira asks if they truly don't care about dying from starvation. His companion chimes in, confirming she has heard of this peculiar elven detachment from life. A memory shows the former demon lord commanding the sisters to survive for their race's sake. Akira realizes this command utilized a unique skill that forces absolute obedience upon others. Dike suggests that a similar command from Akira could restore her sister's desire to eat. She explains that the original binding orders vanished the moment the previous demon lord died. Admitting her own exhaustion, she notes that she is barely holding herself together. The goblin chief looks down, finally understanding the tragic cause of the sisters' lethargy. He observes their pale, frail forms and feels a deep sense of pity for their condition. Dike lets out a tearful, final cry for help, desperately begging him to save her family. Akira nods and agrees to help, giving his word to the desperate elf. Dike gasps in disbelief and joy at his willingness to save her family. The goblin chief thinks deeply about how to effectively use his unique skill. He instructs Dike to wake her sisters as his companion watches from behind. Eunomia and Irene slowly stir from their slumber with vacant and dazed expressions. Akira asks Dike to hold them steady for what is about to happen. Concentrating his inner power, the chief's eyes gleam with a strange and piercing intensity. The sisters stare at him in a trance as the atmosphere grows remarkably heavy. Suddenly, Akira unleashes a powerful technique that shatters the surrounding structure with force. A massive beam of energy tears through the wall of the small hut. Dike recoils in terror at the unexpected and violent display of goblin strength. The dust settles to reveal a giant hole blasted through the side of the building. The sisters find themselves sitting amidst the lush greenery of the forest outside. Dike runs toward them, relief washing over her as she calls their names. Akira projects a commanding presence, invoking the law of the jungle with absolute authority. A pulse of magical energy washes over the sisters, sparking a light in their eyes. They respond with a quiet but firm acceptance of their new reason to exist. The arrival of villagers with a steaming pot of food breaks the heavy tension. Everyone gathers around as the first meal is prepared for the recovering elves. Akira's companion smiles through tears, happy to see the family finally reunited. The elf sisters look at one another in confusion while trying to process their sudden freedom. Nearby, Akira's companion warmly feeds the youngest sister a spoonful of hot soup to restore her strength. The goblin chief walks away from the joyful celebration, feeling satisfied that his plan worked perfectly. Without warning, a sudden surge of internal damage causes Akira to vomit blood onto the ground. He stumbles and collapses against the dirt as the hidden cost of his ability takes a heavy toll. Hiding behind a building to avoid being seen, the chief struggles to catch his breath in agonizing pain. He quickly activates a powerful healing spell to mend the self-inflicted wounds caused by his substitute technique. While the sisters eat, the narrative explains how Akira bypassed the usual requirements for the law of the jungle. The chief reflects on his clever use of a substitute log to technically defeat the sisters without harming them. Karen approaches Akira while he is still recovering from the physical strain of his magical gamble. She stares at him with a penetrating gaze, trying to understand the reckless methods he uses for others. The goblin chief looks up with a bewildered expression, unsure of why she is acting so serious. Karen crosses her arms and sighs, eventually accepting that his selfless behavior is simply part of his nature. A loud call for the chief rings out through the forest as Dike searches for her savior. She finds him standing with Karen and expresses her overwhelming gratitude for saving her family. With tears of joy, the eldest sister pledges her entire life and service to the goblin chief. Akira laughs off the intense vow, surprised that her loyalty was gained through genuine kindness rather than magic. Karen watches the touching scene from a distance while the group prepares for their next move together.